Welcome, everyone, this is your friend, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if the Avengers of old saw the future unravel in 2035? A special shout out to the original creator, Aragorn II Elessar. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic, Avengers Tower 2035. So the decision is final? Morgan Stark asked Peter Parker. Yes. I think this is the best we can do, Morgan, Peter said with a sigh. I just hope it works. What if it doesn't? Cassie Lang asked him. Then I don't know what I'm going to do, Peter said with a sigh. Let's not dwell over that right now. Thor Odinson said, we need to try it. Thor's right guys. Bruce Banner, or as he was now called due to his appearance, Professor Hulk, told them, this is the only way now. So we're decided on who to bring? Reed Richards asked. Yes. Sam Wilson said, the decision is final. I hope watching all of this makes them get their heads out of their asses. Logan Howlett commented. Good thing you're saying it now and not later, Peter said, Cap would hate it. Yup. Logan said, I know. I don't feel like I can face him right now. Morgan said with a sad sigh, I need time. Same. Cassie said, I need to compose myself. Even I do, Lila Barton said. It's all right. Peter assured them, go right now, you can come whenever you want. The three nodded at him gratefully and walked away. If you need anything, I'll be around. Bobby Morse said as she nodded at them and walked off. Let us bring your comrades from the past, Charles Xavier said with a smile. May 2018 Stark Tower. Tony Stark and Pepper Potts were arguing about something, with James Rhodes watching them from a corner when they disappeared in a flash of light. Queen's Peter Parker had just returned home from school and a bit of superheroing as Spider-Man. As Aunt May asked him how his day was, the two disappeared in a flash of light. Hope Van Dyne was adding the final touches to the quantum tunnel with Scott Lang watching her when the two disappeared in a flash of light. Wakanda's Steve Rogers, Natasha Romanoff and Sam Wilson were visiting Bucky Barnes when all of them disappeared in a flash of light. T'Challa was about to head to his court when he disappeared in a flash of light. Edinburgh Wanda Maximoff and Vision, who was in his human form, were having lunch together when both of them disappeared in a flash of light. Clint's farm. Clint was about to teach Lila Barton some archery when he disappeared in a flash of light. Unknown location. Nick Fury and Maria Hill were about to get into their car when they disappeared in a flash of light. Space Thor was telling Loki why they should take the Asgardians to Norway, with Hulk lingering at the doorway, when all three of them disappeared in a flash of light. Avengers Tower 2035. All of them crashed onto the floor at the same time. What the hell? Tony groaned as he got up. Mr. Stark, Peter asked in shock. Kid? Tony? Tony turned to see Steve standing there. Cap? What's happening? Bucky asked. Barnes? Tony asked with a hint of anger in his voice. Tic-tac? Sam asked in shock as he saw Scott and Hope. Hey man. Scott greeted cheerfully. Clint? Nat? Never would have seen this coming, Fury muttered. Sir? Natasha and Clint said at the same time before noticing Hill. Maria? Where are we? Wanda asked. Wanda? Sam asked in shock before turning to see who was next to her. Vision. You were with her the whole time? Tony asked Vision incredulously. I hate falling. Everyone turned in shock to see the owner of the voice. Loki? Tony, Steve, Natasha, Clint, Fury and Hill looked at him with glares that made the phrase, if looks could kill, come to mind. My friends, Thor greeted happily as they turned to him in shock. Thor, it's so great to see you guys, Thor said happily, and great news, Loki is a good guy now. How can you forgive him after everything he did? Tony asked angrily. What if he is fooling you? Steve asked, getting into business mode. Puny god good. Hulk commented as everyone turned to him in shock. Bruce? Natasha asked. Not Bruce, only Hulk, Hulk said. You can speak full sentences? Congratulations pal, Tony said with a smirk. Suddenly, Hulk grabbed his head as everyone looked at him in concern. He fell to his knees, holding his head, and eventually fell to the ground, and to everyone's shock, his skin started getting normal again as his size reduced. Hulk wasn't there now. It was Bruce Banner. "Hey guys," Bruce groaned as he rubbed his head and got up. "What's going on?" Dr. Banner?" Aunt May said politely as she gestured below him for a second. Bruce looked down and gasped in shock as he realized he was naked. "Oh God." "Do not worry, Dr. Banner. We were prepared for the event that you would need clothes." Everyone turned to see a bald man in a wheelchair with a kind smile on his face. "Who are you?" Tony asked him. "Wheels. My name is Professor Charles Xavier." Charles introduced himself as Reed Richards walked up next to him. "Dr. Banner," he said as he handed Bruce a spare set of clothes, "let's get you changed, come on." Banner nodded thankfully as Reed let him out. "Professor Charles Xavier?" Tony asked in shock, as in the one who wrote the thesis in genetic mutation. "Yes, Mr. Stark, that'd be me," Charles said with a kind smile. "Where are we?" Steve asked him. "Look out of the window. You will realize you know this place like your own name. It's the situation which makes you not realize where you are," Charles told them. Everyone looked out of the window and the Avengers realized they recognized the view. "This is my tower?" Tony asked in shock. "So he disappeared and reappeared in my tower? Now that's a coincidence." Pepper muttered. "How did that happen?" Rhodes asked. "And how did we get here again?" "Because I brought you here." Everyone turned to see the older Peter Parker walking in. "Peter?" Aunt May asked in shock as she looked between him and her Peter. "How can there be two Peters?" "Genetic cloning?" Tony tried to joke but no one laughed. "You hear me?" Peter said in shock. "I am you," the older Peter Parker said, "from the future." Everyone's jaws dropped at that. "The future?" Tony asked incredulously. "Are you kidding me?" "It's true." This time, an older Thor Odinson walked into the room. "You're me?" young Thor asked in shock. "Yes. I am you," older Thor said. "This is the future. And if you still don't believe us, you can take a look at me." Everyone turned to see Professor Hulk walk in. "Be Bruce?" Tony asked in shock. "What happened to you?" Steve asked. "I stopped looking at Hulk as some kind of disease and started looking at him as a cure," Professor Hulk said. "Whoa!" Everyone turned as Bruce walked in, dressed in clothes. "So you're me from the future?" "Looks like Dr. Richards has told you of the matter," older Peter said. "Oh, and Loki is a good guy now," Professor Hulk told them, "so no need for hostility." "No need for hostility my ass," Tony said angrily. "Language," Steve said out of habit. "Yeah, of course. Language. I'm pretty sure you curse when you're alone too," Tony said as he whirled on him. "Tony, what? Angry things are not going the way you want to? Now I know why the two of you need to get your heads out of your asses." Everyone turned to see Logan walking in. Steve's and Bucky's eyes widened in disbelief. "James?" Steve asked, still in disbelief. "Yes, Cap. It's me," Logan said with a smirk. "You two know this guy?" Natasha asked Steve and Bucky. "Yes." Bucky confirmed, "We fought with him, in World War II." "Okay, what?" Tony asked in total disbelief. "You gotta be kidding me. Unless he was on ice too." "I have a healing factor," Logan told them, "it prevents me from aging." "Where were you this whole time?" Steve asked him. "I was drinking to remember," Logan said cryptically. "Now I believe we are in the future." Hope commented, "But why did you bring us here?" "To prevent a catastrophe," older Peter said, "and for that, we need all of you to trust each other again." "And how are you gonna do that? Because I don't see myself trusting these liars right now," Tony said as he pointed at Steve, Natasha, Bucky, Wanda, Vision and Sam. "Tony. The arm, be nice. You all need to understand each other," older Thor said. "All of you know each other well. Some of you do understand each other pretty nicely. Like Cap and Bucky. Mr. Stark and Rhodey. Natasha and Clint," older Peter said, giving examples, "but for all of you to trust each other again, all of you need to understand each other. What makes you tick? What made you into the kind of person you are? And how are you going to do that, Mr. Parker?" T'Challa asked him. "Please don't tell me we're doing therapy," Tony said with a scared expression. "No, that won't be necessary," Professor Hulk said. "In the future, a device has been constructed that allows people to record their memories in a visual medium, enhanced with eyewitness reports, written articles, diary entries, what others said about them, CCTV footage, internet pages, and a lot more." "Wait a second," Peter asked. You're telling me our lives are a TV show? TV show. Movie. Whatever works for you, older Peter said. This technology does sound fascinating. Vision said, humans can do a lot of things if they put their minds to it. Well, you've finally convinced me this is the future, Fury said with a sigh. So you want us to watch the entire life of every single person in this room? Hill asked incredulously. No, not the entire life. Older Thor said, only the important events that made you into who we are. So I'm guessing it will include the time I was a bad guy. Loki said dryly as everyone from the past except Thor and Bruce shot him dirty looks. Look, I know you don't trust him. And I know you two do not trust each other, older Thor said as he looked at Steve and Tony, but right now, you need to be civil to each other. Can you do that? Steve and Tony glared at each other for half a minute before looking at older Thor and nodding. And him too, older Peter said as he pointed at Loki. All right. Tony groaned. So we're getting started? Wanda asked. Yes. Older Peter said as he pointed to 4 huge couches. Make yourselves comfortable. All of them started taking their seats. At the leftmost couch sat Tony and Pepper, Peter and Aunt May and Rhodes. On the next couch sat Steve, Bucky and Natasha, Wanda and Vision, Sam, Scott and Hope. On the next couch sat Thor and Loki, T'Challa, Bruce, Clint, Fury and Hill. Wait a second, Clint suddenly asked, if we're going to stay here for a long time, wouldn't the others back in our time wonder where we have gone? That is not something I am comfortable with, T'Challa said, remembering his duties as king. Don't worry. We got that handled. Logan said. After all of this is finished, we will drop you back to the exact time from where we picked you up, Professor Hulk said. Everyone instantly calmed down. Smart, buddy, Tony commented. Is it just me or did I look better either of the other ways? Bruce asked as he looked at Professor Hulk. You did. Everyone commented at the same time. Yeah. I can understand why you feel that way. Professor Hulk said, but I feel the best I have in this form. Everyone simply nodded, deciding that Bruce knew best about what he preferred to look like. All right everybody, it's starting, older Peter said. One more thing. Tony asked, how am I supposed to differentiate between the older and younger versions of you lot if I have to call you? Call me Benjamin. Older Peter said. My middle name, younger Peter commented. Odin-san. Older Thor said. Good, younger Thor commented. Professor Hulk. Professor Hulk said. Professor Hulk. I like it, Banner commented. With that, Benjamin, Odin-san, Professor Hulk and Logan sat on the last couch as Professor Xavier wheeled his chair next to them. The screen was turned on. So, who are we starting with in this? Tony asked. It's actually you we are starting with, bub, Logan said to his shock. Me? Tony asked. Wow. I must be popular. You're popular. Pepper pointed out to him. He knows that. He just likes saying it, Rhodes told her. Classic Tony. Natasha commented. While there were some superheroes who came before you, Benjamin started. It all began with you, Mr. Stark. You are the man responsible for many things in this universe, Mr. Stark. Xavier told him, it all began with you. Thanks. Tony commented. He is going to let that get to his head, isn't he? Sam asked no one in particular. Won't be Stark if he doesn't, Fury said, but it won't be Stark if he lets it get to his head too much either. The scene opened at the Kunar province, Afghanistan, as a military convoy was passing through the mostly empty road. Back in Black, by AC/DC was playing at full volume. I like this tune. Thor commented. Really? Loki asked. It sounds like noise to my ears. So not only are you a murderer but you also have terrible taste in music. Tony said to him, why am I not surprised? It's actually pretty good. Steve commented. That's my man. Tony said and everyone was a bit surprised that Steve and Tony agreed on something. Inside the Humvee, Tony Stark was sitting with his whiskey as the soldiers looked at him awkwardly. Tony commented on their awkward silence and asked if they were not allowed to talk, until one of the young soldiers said they could talk. It's like people are intimidated by your very presence, Hill commented. Well, I definitely was. Peter said, when I met him for the first time. Really? Aunt May asked. I wasn't. I think he has that effect on many, Benjamin said. Well, I am considered larger than life. Tony commented as everyone rolled their eyes. Tony commented that it must be personal, until the driver, who was a woman to Tony's surprise, said that he intimidated them. She just hit the mark. Clint said. Wow, you're making archery jokes of all things. Do something unexpected, Tony told him. I would, but no one would like it, Clint said darkly. Tony commented on the female airman's bone structure, making her blush. Back when you could never keep it in your pants, Rhodes commented. Hey, Tony said, I am a changed man now. I know, Pepper said as she held his hand. Ah, Scott said, making Hope smack him in the arm, much to his embarrassment. The young soldier asked to take a picture with him and he accepted, though he joked about not wanting to see the picture on his MySpace page. Tony also told him not to throw a gang sign, making him put it down, until he told the soldier he was joking, making him put it back up. The sarcasm is strong with this one, Sam said. It really is, Natasha said. I wish I could be like that, Peter said. Nope, Aunt May told him sternly, you try to act like him and I will. Peter immediately shut up. I told you to be better than me, kid, Tony told him. Don't worry, Peter. Our brand of humor is annoying enough. Benjamin told him as Odinson, Professor Hulk, Logan, Xavier and Aunt May chuckled. As the soldier put up his gang sign, Tony said, yeah, peace, I love peace. I'd be out a job with peace. Tony looked down guiltily, ashamed of that sentence he had said. Pepper held his hand to offer support and comfort. Just before the picture could be taken, the car in front of them was blown up, startling them and trapping their vehicle. Oh no, Pepper said in horror. Tony had told her about this moment many times, but it was still not easy at all to see it happen. The woman and the other soldier in the front ran out to fire at the insurgents, only to be gunned down in quick succession. The one who wanted to take a picture also got out, telling Stark to stay inside, only to be killed by an explosion which startled Tony. He was a good man. Tony sighed sadly as Pepper held his hand to offer comfort. Steve sighed sadly, realizing why Tony had snapped when he had asked him if it was the first time he had lost a soldier after Coulson's death. I'm sorry, Steve said to him and he simply nodded, not caring where his source of comfort came from at the moment. His ears ringing from the explosions, Tony ran out of the Humvee, avoiding 2 explosions, as the soldiers of the other Humvee were also gunned down. He found cover and attempted to call Rhodes on his phone for help, only for a bomb to land close to him. He realized it was made by Stark Industries. Shit, Sam said. There is a bit of irony there, Hope commented. The bomb exploded, throwing Tony away by a few feet. He was still conscious though. He realized he was bleeding badly from various points of his body. He opened his shirt to see that shrapnel had penetrated his bulletproof vest, before losing consciousness. The shrapnel, Pepper said, the thing you were trying to keep at bay. The arc reactor did that, Tony said, for a time. Good thing you're free of it now, Mr. Stark, T'Challa said and Tony nodded at him. The scene changed to an unknown location. Tony woke up, tied to a chair, as several people surrounded him, one of them reading a ransom note in Hindi to an unseen person. It is Obadiah Stane they are reading the note to, Vision said. Yup. Tony snarled, that traitor. The Avengers who were fugitives from the law decided not to say anything, as he considered them traitors too at the moment. Tony looked on in dismay at the various guns pointed at him, before losing consciousness again. This is where it started, didn't it? Hope asked, your journey to be Iron Man? Yes. This is where it began, Tony said. This was your crucible, Pepper told him and he nodded. Every hero has an origin story, Peter said and everyone except Benjamin rolled their eyes in annoyance, embarrassing him. Everyone still finds that annoying, Benjamin told him and both chuckled. The scene changed to Las Vegas, 36 hours earlier, where a presentation of Tony's successful life was going on, as several of his achievements were shown: building a circuit board at age 4, a steam engine at age 7, and graduating summa cum laude from MIT at age 17. You built a circuit board when you were 4 years old? Scott asked incredulously. Yup. Tony said, was pretty basic compared to what I did later. And graduating summa cum laude from MIT at 17? Hope asked, really? That's Tony for you, Pepper said. Larger than life, Rhodes added. I can see why people are intimidated by you, Aunt May told him. I wasn't, Thor said suddenly. Neither was I, Loki said. You are both gods. Odinson told them, or at least considered gods. Good point. Thor conceded. A headline of Howard's and Maria's deaths was shown, as the narrator adopted a slightly sad tone. Bucky looked down and sighed in guilt, not able to look anyone in the eye due to shame, as Natasha grasped his hand tightly to offer comfort and support. Steve put a hand on his shoulder. He looked at his girlfriend and his best friend and nodded in thanks. Tony decided not to look at him for the moment, not trusting himself. Obadiah Stane was then shown, as the narrator said how he filled the gap until Tony took charge at age 21 and became CEO. The narrator also talked about the several weapons they had built to ensure freedom and protect America and its interests around the globe. Weapons of mass destruction. Fury said, back when they made you money. While I have moved on from that, it still causes me a lot of guilt, Tony said. I know it does. Wanda told him, and everyone was surprised that she was the one offering him comfort. Colonel James Rhodes walked up to the podium and praised Tony, calling him his friend and great mentor. You looked so different back then, buddy, Tony commented. Yeah, Rhodes agreed, I looked very different. I know, right, Pepper said, what happened to you? Rhodes shrugged, no idea. 2. Rhodes presented the Apogee Award to Tony, but he was nowhere to be seen. Stane looked at him and walked up to the stage, taking the award in Tony's place and saying how honored Tony felt to receive this prestigious award. I bet you wanted it for yourself, Pepper snarled angrily. He must be jealous of the attention I got, Tony said. I can't believe I never saw that coming, Rhodes said. Really? Hill asked, because he is already setting off warning bells in my head even here. You are a SHIELD agent. You're trained, so you can sense when something's off, Tony told her. I know, Loki said as he shot a glare at Natasha, remembering the time she had outwitted him. Stane said how the best thing about Tony was also the worst thing, that he was always working. Can't argue with that, Pepper said. Even I can't, Tony said. So you're making another suit already, Mr. Stark? Peter asked in excitement. Oh, I made it already, Tony said before turning to Bruce. You're gonna love it, pal. I would love to see it sometime, Tony, Bruce said with a smile. It was pretty awesome seeing it for the first time, Professor Hulk said as he remembered the fight with Ebony Maw and Cole Obsidian in New York. I haven't seen it yet, Rhodes said. Oh, you're gonna love it, Tony told him. The scene changed to Caesar's palace, where Tony was playing craps. The crowd all erupted as they all won big, especially the two hot women by Tony's side. Tony bumped his head into Happy Hogan's shoulder, who smiled. That doesn't look like work, Natasha said. Hey, Tony said, gambling takes brains. Or lack of it, Pepper said, earning her a glare. And that, Peter, is why you shouldn't try to act like Tony Stark, Aunt May told her nephew as everyone chuckled. As Tony flirted with the woman on his right using his intelligence, Rhodes arrived, angry at Tony for not attending the event while the billionaire did another role. Tony was surprised that Rhodes was in on this. Rhodes simply said they wanted him to present it to make him feel honored. I am honored, Colonel, Tony said as everyone snickered. Very funny. Rhodes groaned. Rhodes handed Tony the award. He took it and handed it to the woman on his right before picking up the dice again. He had the woman blow on his hand in a flirty manner as a good luck charm. He tried to make Rhodes do it too, but he pushed his hand off, making the dice fall. But he crapped out. Tony glared at Rhodes, who simply shrugged. Tony glared at Rhodes and he just shrugged. A few minutes later, Tony and Rhodes walked out along with the former's entourage, which also included Happy. Tony promised Rhodes he wouldn't be late the other day. He handed the award to a man cosplaying as Julius Caesar. Everyone snickered as Natasha commented, Caesar must be feeling very honored. He should, Tony said as everyone rolled their eyes. Tony walked towards his car. As Happy opened the door, someone called out to him. Tony turned around to see an attractive reporter holding a recorder. The security tried to stop her as she introduced herself as Christine Everhart. Great, Scott groaned. Her. You know Christine? Tony asked him in surprise. You Scott groaned. She interviewed me one day before my release. She was being very unfair to me because VistaCorp, from whom I had stolen, was one of the financial bankers of WHIH World News. My animosity towards her remarks resulted in me getting tased. 3. The woman really is an opportunity grabber, Hope commented. Typical of her, Tony said. I remember meeting her, Pepper said in disgust. Tony agreed to an interview as she asked him several questions about his nicknames like the Da Vinci of our time and the Merchant of Death. He dismissed the first one but accepted the second. She said she was a graduate of Brown University as Tony assured her that when weapons were no longer needed, he would start making bricks and beams for baby hospitals. So much for that statement. Tony groaned. As the interview continued, Tony told her Howard's philosophy: peace means having a bigger stick than the other guy. Sad but true. Steve said sadly. Tony told her how his father was a hero due to his breakthroughs and also said all the recent breakthroughs he himself had made in science were due to military funding. Christine asked if he had ever lost an hour of sleep in his entire life, to which he replied he would be prepared to lose a few with her. Don't tell me, Aunt May started. Really, dude? Scott asked in disgust. Did you just call me dude? Tony said. I don't want to see that, Pepper groaned. Well, Benjamin started and everyone from the past groaned. Sometime later, Tony and Christine have sex on his bed in his mansion, with her already in her panties. As the two continued kissing and groping each other, they fell off the bed. Peter Parker, you need to look away right now, Aunt May said firmly, but the young boy was already gawking with wide eyes. You do not need to protect him from everything forever, Wanda told Aunt May sadly, remembering how much bad stuff she had been exposed to at a young age. Vision held her hand in comfort. Well, to be fair, I have already seen it, Aunt May. Benjamin told Aunt May and she groaned. Wow, you must be really charming, Scott told Tony. Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, Tony boasted. He then noticed Pepper giving him a glare. Genius, billionaire, philanthropist, Tony corrected and she smiled. Hey Viz, could you see when you were Jarvis? Natasha asked him randomly. I couldn't exactly look away, Vision said defensively. You got a dirty AI there, man. Sam joked to Vision's embarrassment. You are moving pretty fast in the relationship, Thor commented. Excuse me, relationship? Tony asked as everyone looked at Thor incredulously. You were consummating, so I thought you were, brother. Loki said as Thor turned to him. You were on Earth for 2 years and you never heard of casual sex? Casual sex? Thor questioned. I do know about it now. Odinson popped up. Good to know, Loki said. What is casual sex? Thor asked. I will explain later. Loki said. He did get calls from angry exes while working with me, Bruce revealed to everyone's shock. You still get calls? Natasha asked. He does actually, Pepper revealed as everyone snickered. Never change man, never change, Professor Hulk said. Good thing I never gave my number to women I slept with, Logan muttered, not that I had a number. In the nearby room, Matt Murdock and his wife Elektra Nachos Murdock, Jessica Jones Cage and her husband Luke Cage, Frank Castle and Trish Walker were having lunch. Hearing Aunt May telling Peter to look away from the screen, Matt said, looks like they have seen what Tony and Christine were up to. That man used to bring a lot of women home, Elektra said with a smirk. One of the many reasons I found his personality repulsive, until I found out what he did to save the universe, Frank said. You remember what Tony said about your show once? Jessica asked Trish and the other woman looked away in embarrassment. What? Elektra asked out of curiosity, what did he say? I think I haven't heard that one. Luke said. I want to know, Matt said. Yes please. Tell us. Elektra insisted. Even I am curious now, Frank said. Well, Trish started. Tony was once asked if he would ever visit Trish Talk by an interviewer. And what did he say? Elektra asked. He said that. Trish trailed off for a few seconds before continuing. He said that if he visited Trish Talk, it would change its name to Trish Screaming. Everyone burst out in laughter at Tony's comment. That sounds like him, Matt said, struggling to control his laughter. Sweet Christmas, Luke commented. Back in the viewing room, everyone continued watching. Christine, who was wearing nothing but the bed sheets, woke up on hearing Jarvis greeting her. She pulled the sheet around her and stared in amazement as the big window by the bed lit up with electronic icons showing the time, the temperature, and the day as Jarvis continued telling her about the day. The Malibu house. Tony remembered. Christine walked around, wearing Tony's shirt to cover her bra and panties, calling out to him. "You're already on a first-name basis," Sam joked. "And you're already exchanging clothes," Rhodes added. Everyone snickered as Tony blushed in embarrassment. Christine tried to touch a small blue screen next to a door, but Jarvis' voice told her she was not allowed to access the area. "And you never will be," Tony said. The voice of Pepper Potts said that it was Jarvis who ran the house as Christine turned to face her. Pepper told Christine her clothes had been dry cleaned and pressed and a car outside would take her anywhere. Christine mocked Pepper then even after all these years. Tony had her picking up dry cleaning. Pepper said she did everything Mr. Stark required, including occasionally taking out the trash. "Burn," Sam said. "My God, you are badass, good woman," Scott complimented Pepper, who blushed. "You have a lot of sass in you," Hope complimented. "She sure does," Natasha agreed. "Yup," Clint agreed. "Your wit sure is sharp, Miss Potts," T'Challa said. "I'm so glad I never argued with her," Thor said. "That was the best comeback I have ever seen," Aunt May said too. "Where do you think she gets that from?" Tony said. "You get that from me actually," Pepper said with a glare, and he shut up as everyone chuckled. "Who has the better girlfriend now, huh? Point Break?" Tony asked Thor in a mocking tone as everyone chuckled. Tony was working in his workshop with Jarvis as Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies played at full volume. Pepper entered, getting off her phone, and told Tony he needed to be halfway around the world while his flight was supposed to leave half an hour ago. The two then talked about some appointments as she made Tony sign a document. Tony asked if she had plans. She said she did, because it was her birthday. "You forgot her birthday," Maria said in amusement. "Classic Stark," Fury added. Tony told her to get something nice from him, sounding unusually sincere. She said she had, and it was very tasteful. Tony drank from his cup and, putting it in her hands, walked off. "Ah," Peter said, but shut up on seeing Tony's glare. Tony arrived at the airport in a sleek sports car, with Happy pulling up behind him in a black sedan. The two exchanged some banter before he walked up to Rhodes, who was pissed that Tony made him stand for 3 hours. "3 hours, dude," Rhodes said. "You still salty about that?" Tony asked. "Yup." Inside the plane, Rhodes was obviously still pissed over Tony being late, feeling that the man didn't respect him. Tony tried to get Rhodes to drink hot sake as the blonde stewardess poured him a glass. Rhodes protested, but eventually Tony convinced him. "I knew you'd like it," Tony said as Rhodes buried his head in his hands. Later, Slept on Tony by Ghostface Killah was playing as a drunk Rhodes ranted about how every person who had the uniform had his back, though Tony didn't pay attention as he watched the three stewardesses dancing for their entertainment, with their shirts tied above their stomach and their short skirts showing plenty of leg. Rhodes buried his head in his hands as everyone laughed at him. The flight descended to Bagram Base in Afghanistan as Tony walked out and greeted the army men. "Uh-oh," Steve said as Tony looked at the place with wide eyes. Tony then started giving a speech about weapons. "They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it, that's how America does it, and it's worked out pretty well so far," Tony said. "The hell?" Steve muttered. Tony gestured with his hand, and the rocket began to move, cameras facing up, tips pointing toward the sky. First one, then the next, and then the third of the rockets zoomed into the air. In mid-flight, smaller rockets burst out of the large ones, followed by yet another stream of even smaller rockets, all of which went flying a safe, far distance away. As they fell far behind him, Tony called it the Jericho. "What will they do to the good guys?" Clint muttered. Tony spread his hands as the explosives lit up the desert with fire before darkening it with smoke. An explosion that must indeed have echoed the force of the crumbling walls of Jericho shook the ground, and a cloud of dust nearly engulfed Tony and his audience, making some of their caps fly off. Wanda shivered, the explosion making her relive the trauma of her parents' death from the Stark Industries bomb in Sokovia. Vision held her hand to provide comfort. "Freedom line?" Steve asked. "I knew the word, freedom, would get to you, Rogers," Tony grumbled. Tony then took a glass for himself and poured the wine before pulling out his phone. He accepted the video chat from Stain, who asked him how it had gone, to which Tony replied it was like early Christmas. Obadiah said he would see Tony the next day and cut the call. With a bunch of guns pointed at my face. Tony grumbled as everyone glared at Stain. Tony then got into his Humvee, making comments about it, as Rhodes complimented his performance. The Humvee was started up by the lady driver as Rhodes walked off. As the convoy went through the desert, the explosion happened, trapping Tony's Humvee, like in the first scene. "This is where it began, Mr. Stark," Xavier said. "Yup," Tony said, "fun's over." Tony faded in and out of consciousness as he was operated on, with a bright light shining down on him. He screamed in pain as his shrapnel was removed and something round was placed inside him. "That was the operation?" Bruce exclaimed, outraged. "Terrorists didn't care about his pain," Professor Hulk said sadly. "Because they're a bunch of gits," Logan added. "They operated on him without anesthesia," Sam said, horrified, as Tony shuddered at the memory and Pepper held his hand to offer comfort. Bucky held his head, Tony's scream reminding him of the screams of his victims. Natasha touched his face to offer comfort. After a few more torturous seconds, the surgery was over. "You sure you can watch this, Mr. Stark?" Benjamin asked him. "Yeah," Tony said with a nod and a confident smile, "I can." Tony woke up to realize a tube attached to his nose with a bandage. He carefully removed it before ripping out the bandage. "Ew," Peter groaned at the sight. "You had to remove it," Fury said as Tony shrugged. Tony turned to see a cup and tried to reach it, only to knock it to the floor accidentally. He heard a cough and looked up to see an elderly man shaving in front of a small mirror, humming to himself. Tony tried to move but an electrical cord attached to his chest prevented him, as the man advised him not to do it. "Who is that?" Scott asked. "Name's Yinsen," Tony said with a sad sigh. Wanda and Xavier could sense some of Tony's pain on seeing Yinsen. While they did not always read minds actively, the thoughts and feelings of people around them could still be heard by them in their heads as a very light background hum. This was the origin of Iron Man, written in blood and fire. Tony turned to see he was hooked to a car battery of all things. He ripped off some of his bandages to see the other end of the cord was attached to a round rusty metal disc just larger than a man's palm, sitting right over his heart, held in place with 5 large screws. "Jesus," Scott said, "a car battery? The man hooked you to a car battery?" Aunt May asked. "He saved my life with that," Tony said. "That is your arc reactor," Hope said in realization. "It is," Pepper said. "Stark had a pretty rough start," Fury said. "I can see," Hill agreed. "Saving your life in a cave in the middle of a desert. The man is very impressive," T'Challa said, his eyes full of respect for Yinsen. "He sure is," Steve agreed. "Good thing there wasn't any rust on it," Bruce noted. "Yeah, good thing," Professor Hulk agreed. Later, Tony sat quietly as the man cooked. Tony asked him what he had done, to which he replied he had saved his life. He had removed some shrapnel but the remainder was headed to his atrial septum, with the electromagnet stopping it. He tossed Tony a container which showed the shrapnel that had been removed. "Looks like he tried his best," Pepper said. "He did," Tony agreed. "That was the best that could be done in those circumstances," Vision agreed. The man said that people in his village with those kinds of wounds were called the Walking Dead due to the fact that the shrapnel would reach their vital organs in a week. "I loved that show," Scott said, referring to The Walking Dead. "It has gone to crap," Hope said. "Yup," Peter agreed. "You watch The Walking Dead?" Aunt May asked with a glare. "Oops," Peter said. "Shut your mouth from now on," Benjamin told him and he nodded as everyone chuckled. The man told him the electromagnet stopped the shrapnel from entering his heart. Tony zipped up his sweater without a word before noticing a camera. The man commented on it before telling Tony the two had met years ago at a technical conference at Bern, not that Tony remembered. "I do now," Tony said, "a lot's happened since then." "I know, right," Pepper said. "I still don't know the exact details of what happened after that," Bruce said. "Because you fell asleep," Tony said. "I do know the exact details now," Professor Hulk said. The man chuckled and said how Tony had been drunk and still managed to give a lecture on integrated circuits. "Wow," Scott said, impressed. "I have not met many people on Earth who can hold their liquor like you can, buddy," Thor told Tony, who smirked. "It holds true even now," Odinson added. I know you guys hate me, but I am going to agree with my brother or brothers from different time periods on this, Loki said. When Tony asked where they were, someone unbolted the door from outside and voices started shouting at them to get up. What now? Bucky sighed. The terrorists, Steve said simply. The 10 Reigns. Natasha realized. They were all sons of guns based on what I have heard, Clint said. The man pulled Tony to his feet and told him to do as he did while a small crowd of armed men entered, with Tony realizing in horror those were his guns they were using. Lot of irony there. Hope commented. Bought them from you, used them on you, Fury said. Merchant of Death, remember? Tony shrugged. One of the men stepped forward and spoke in tones of welcome as Tony's fellow prisoner translated it for him. Welcome, Tony Stark, the most famous mass murderer in the history of America. Wanda was surprised someone else called Tony the same name she had for most of her life. Tony's fellow prisoner told him their captor wanted him to build the Jericho for him. That's what they wanted, Thor realized. To cause mass destruction, Steve sighed. Why am I not surprised? Sam muttered. Pretty unpleasant lot they were, Rhodes said. The captor passed him the photograph which he passed to Tony. After looking at it, Tony refused. Shit, Sam said. Bad idea, bub. Logan agreed. Oh Tony! Pepper exclaimed in horror. Tony's head was shoved and removed from the water again and again until his electromagnet sparked and his body spasmed. Not every billionaire with no experience with reality can endure what you did, Mr. Stark, T'Challa said with some respect in his eyes. While Sam and Clint still held grudges against Tony, they could still feel sympathy for him. Tony suddenly heard the faint voice of Pepper in his head, Tony. Pepper looked at Tony with wide eyes, touched by how much he felt for her even back then. You were thinking of me the whole time. You were what kept me going, Tony said, and to everyone's shock, Pepper kissed him passionately, not caring about the others present in the room. Peter, Aunt May and Rhodes shifted away a bit uncomfortably. After 1 full minute, the kiss stopped and the two didn't look at anyone else as Benjamin continued the recording. Later, Tony's captors put a sack over his head and hauled him out of the cave into the open before removing the sack, making him adjust his eyes to the brightness. Tony saw several of his weapons there. The bearded man talked to Tony, with his fellow prisoner translating, saying they would set him free if he made the Jericho for them in a week. Tony shook hands with him, though he said the man wouldn't free him, with his fellow prisoner agreeing. From a distance, a bald man watched him. Free you from this world, he means, Fury said dryly. Good thing I did that instead, Tony said darkly. The bald guy is the leader, I guess, Peter said. Yup. Tony confirmed. In the cave, Tony sat in grim silence as his fellow prisoner told him no one would find him in these mountains. He told Stark his legacy was in the hands of murderers. Is that how you want to go out? Is this the last act of defiance of the great Tony Stark? Or are you going to do something about it? The man asked with a raised voice. The speech. Steve commented. I think he can give you a run for your money, Cap, Sam told him. Not going to argue with that. Natasha agreed. Tony was hopeless, saying they would kill both of them anyway, to which the prisoner responded that it was an important week then. It sure was, Tony said, and so it begins, Thor said. So it begins indeed. Odinson agreed. Later, the place was in bustle as Tony gave instructions for the equipment he needed at his workstation as his fellow prisoner translated. It was then, was it not? T'Challa asked. It was then, Your Highness, Tony confirmed. As the two unscrewed an explosive, Tony asked him how many languages he spoke, to which he gave his answer and also said these people were called the 10 Reigns. He suggested to Tony to include him in the planning process. Tony extracted a tiny piece of metal from inside a rocket, revealing it to be palladium, saying it was 0.15 grams, and 1.6 more was needed. He told his fellow to break it down to another 11. Palladium, huh? Peter said with wide eyes. Two terrorists watched them and concluded Tony was working. Well, he is working. Rhodes, what you want, Fury added. Shows how dumb you are, bub, Logan said to the terrorists. Tony gathered stuff of deep, metallic red into a bowl and put a smelting cup into it before giving it a tap. His fellow lifted it with a pair of smelting tongs as Tony said they only got one shot at this, to which he said he had steady hands which kept Tony alive. He is a pretty good surgeon, Bruce said, impressed. Couldn't agree more. Professor Hulk agreed. Tony put the car battery down as his fellow poured the melted palladium into it. At Tony's request, he introduced himself as Yinsen. "Hello, Yinsen," Natasha said. "Nice to meet you," Clint said too. "He was a good man," Tony said sadly. Tony lifted a slender ring of the palladium, now cooled and hardened, from the red sand-like stuff with a pair of tweezers. He looked it over, and placed it inside a protective frame. He began welding pieces of copper wire to the frame, bit by bit. And then, there it was, sitting on the table, a small, circular object that glowed brightly. The lights around Tony flickered and the battery to which he was connected began to sputter. "The arc reactor." Bruce breathed in awe. "The first one," Tony said, "in all its glory." As Yinsen commented it didn't look like a Jericho, Tony told him it was a miniaturized arc reactor which would keep the shrapnel out of his heart. It would generate 3 gigajoules per second, enough to run his heart for 50 lifetimes and something huge for 15 minutes. "But how did you shrink it?" Scott asked. "You're the shrink dude. You tell me," Tony joked as everyone snickered. Later, Tony showed Yinsen crumpled pieces of paper and joined them, revealing an image through multiple layers of paper. "There it is," Thor said in awe. "The first Iron Man suit," Steve said. "Can't wait to see it," an excited Peter said. "It was a pretty good basic model," Benjamin said. "Sure was," Tony agreed. "They have come a long way from there, haven't they?" Natasha asked. "Yup. Very long," Tony said. "Like you wouldn't believe," Professor Hulk said as he remembered the first time he had seen the bleeding edge armor again. Later, while under surveillance, the two talked as Yinsen said he was from Gulmira, with a family he would see again after escaping. He asked Stark if he would too, to which he replied in the negative. "You sure did see them again." Tony sighed sadly as Wanda saw an image of Yinsen lying on his back, trapped under a large sack, flashing across his mind, while Pepper held his hand in comfort. "So you're a man who has everything, and nothing," Yinsen noted. "Well, not exactly nothing," Tony said as him and Pepper exchanged a smile. Later that night, as they worked, the big man looked at them through a small sliding tab in the door and walked away, satisfied. Tony continued working for some time with a powerful wood-cutting machine and safety goggles over his eyes as pieces of the would-be suit were seen scattered around. He attached a normal tube to small green can. The watchers were uneasy as it didn't look like the picture. "Not completely dumb," Thor noted. "The guy who hired them must have seen something in them," Loki pointed out. Sometime later, the bald leader barged inside with his men as the two stopped working. "Oh no," Pepper gasped. "This can't be good." The man looked at the arc reactor and said how the bow and arrow used to be the pinnacle of weapons technology. "Still packs a punch if used right," Clint said and everyone nodded in agreement. Talking about the history of empires and weapons, he said how the latest Stark weapons helped in making empires nowadays. He then turned to Yinsen and demanded an explanation. Yinsen tried to convince him they were making the Jericho but he had none of it and made his men force him to the ground. Using a pair of tongs, he picked up a piece of coal and tried to put it in his mouth. After few tense moments, Tony stopped him, saying Yinsen was a good assistant. Dropping the coal, the man said they had till the next day. "That was close." Aunt May sighed in relief. "Too close," Sam noted. "But they do not have much time now," Vision noted. "They have to work fast." T'Challa agreed. "They will," Fury told them. "It is about to be finished." Steve realized, the first suit. "Yup," Tony said. Tony was working. With one hand, he held the piece of metal steady, with the other, he was forging. Clang, 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 went the hammer. "That looks so epic," Peter said. "It sure does, no matter how many times I watch it," Benjamin agreed. "You're a very good smith," Thor complimented. "The dwarves at Nidavellir would be proud," Loki agreed. Thanks," Tony said, not understanding the second compliment but grateful for them both, even if the second one came from Loki of all people. No one noticed the sad expression on Odinson's face at the mention of Nidavellir from Loki. Then a large breastplate was fitted to an equally large back piece. Tony put his jacket back on, a pair of protective gloves went on his hands. Yinsen helped Tony put the breastplate on as he told him the layout of the place. "Yes," Thor, Bruce and Peter cheered at the same time. "You learnt the layout of the place in spite of a bag on your head? Wow," Natasha said, impressed. "You're a potentially good S.H.I.E.L.D. agent," Hill said. "No," Tony and Fury said at the same time, and everyone chuckled as they thought about how many arguments the two would have if such a thing ever happened. The bald leader looked at the screen and frowned on realizing he couldn't see Tony or Yinsen on the screen, so he sent two of his men to check. He managed to barely see Yinsen from one of the screens, hidden by something large. "Oh," Sam said. "That's not good," Steve agreed. "For them," Tony shot back. The two men slid open the slide and called out to Yinsen in Hungarian, which he didn't understand, though Tony urged him to say something. "Yeah, say something in a language you barely know," Clint snarked. Yinsen tried to reply, but they started opening the door, not noticing the explosive wired to the inside of the door. "Oh boy," Scott said. "This is going to be interesting," Hope said. As they opened the door, there was a bang. The two were sent flying back by several feet as the camera was destroyed. The bald leader yelled to his men and they charged towards the prisoners' quarters as he picked up a walkie-talkie and started barking orders. "Not sure if it's gonna help you now," Bucky said for the first time, surprising everyone. "It won't," Vision agreed. Inside, Yinsen hastily initialized the power sequence on the laptop on Tony's instructions and progress bar started as he buttoned Tony up. "It had to be buttoned up?" Pepper asked incredulously. "He has come a long way from that," Wanda said. "Very long," Xavier agreed. Yinsen realized they were out of time as the progress bar was only a third of the way loaded. "We need more time." "I'm going to buy you some time," Yinsen said as Tony protested. "Stick to the plan. Stick to the plan." But Yinsen grabbed up a weapon from the floor where the men had been blasted backward earlier, and fired it into the air as he ran down the passageway. "He is brave," Sam said. "One of the bravest men I have seen," Rhodes agreed. "Sometimes, simple men can show a lot of bravery," Steve said on seeing Yinsen's bravery, which reminded him of the old man who had stood up to Loki. Tony didn't speak, replaying the horrible scene in his head. A howling Yinsen made the terrorists run the other way as he fired his gun, only to find a score of men pointing their guns on him at the entrance, the bald leader among them. "No," Scott groaned. "Oh no," Peter said, fearing for Yinsen's life. The progress bar made it all the way as some more men entered the quarters, passing by the bodies of the two dead men. At the end of the metal tube, a gloved hand stirred and flexed itself. "Oh," Vision cried. "This is it," Tony said. A bright light came up behind one of the men, who turned to look, only for a strong blow from the now alive suit to SRDS with a cry as he fired around erratically. "How do you like that, huh?" Peter cheered. "Not all that much," Natasha said dryly. At last, Sam said. The other three men fired but nothing happened. As they stopped, a bright light suddenly came up to them. The suit smacked two of them away. The last one tried to fire but he was smacked away too as Tony straightened himself in the suit. "Look how clumsy that is," Clint said. "Can't disagree," Tony said, "pretty heavy too." "I wouldn't want to wear it," Rhodes said. "Don't blame you," Wanda agreed. "Still, he made that in a cave with a box of scraps under surveillance," Steve noted, impressed. More men fired at Tony as he marched at them. One of them charged but he hit him so hard he was sent flying off and hit his head on a wall. Another charged but met the same fate as Tony elbowed a third one out. He marched towards more men as they ran off in fear and shut the door. "As if that will save you," Bruce said. "The suit does the damn job," Fury said. "It did that pretty good," Tony agreed. One of the men got locked with Tony accidentally. As Tony marched towards him, he knocked at the door frantically. On the other side, the men waited fearfully as the knocking stopped and someone banged on the door thrice. They ran the other way as with a fourth bang, Tony kicked the door open. "Ouch," Pepper said about the one who had gotten locked with Tony. As the men ran in fear, Tony knocked one of them out, but his arm got stuck in a crevice of the rock. One of the men noticed and fired at him. But the bullet glanced off his helmet with such force that it rebounded and killed the shooter. Everyone cheered happily at the scene. "That's what you get for your sins," Scott said. Tony freed his arm as the bald leader prepared himself at the entrance. As Yinsen lay coughing and choking, partly buried under a pile of rice sacks, Tony turned the corner and called out to him. Yinsen tried to warn him, but the bald leader had already fired. A small rocket sped towards him, but he barely avoided as it exploded behind him. Tony raised his arm and fired his own blast, sending the bald leader flying back into the cave with a howl. "Woohoo!" Peter cheered. "Yeah," Rhodes cheered too. "You got what you deserved," Sam said. Tony threw the rice sacks away and, removing his visor, begged Yinsen to come with him, asking him to stick to the plan, though Yinsen refused. Stark brought up his family, to which Yinsen replied, "My family's dead. I'm going to see them now, Stark. It's okay. I want this." Tony seemed to accept as he said quietly, "Thank you for saving me." A dying Yinsen said, "Don't waste it. Don't waste your life," and then his breath ceased. "No," Peter cried out as Aunt May covered her mouth with her hand. "He was brave," Thor said sadly as he slumped back into his couch. "I agree," Logan said. Steve looked at Tony sadly, remembering the death of Erskine. "Why did he have to go?" Scott muttered. "I wish I could have met him," Rhodes said. "Me too," Sam agreed. "I'm sorry, Tony," Pepper said sadly as she grasped Tony's hand to offer comfort and he squeezed back. Wanda could feel some of Tony's pain too. Tony angrily turned his head up while the other terrorists waited outside for him, weapons raised. "Death is upon you," Thor declared to them. "The flames of war are upon you," Loki added. "You guys are so screwed now," Bruce said. First, they heard a thumping sound. Then, they saw the glow of the arc reactor. And then Tony stood in front of them with the suit on him. The others watched with interest. While the suit was very clumsy compared to the newer ones, there was something about it that felt intimidating. The soldiers fired at him, but he was unaffected. As they stopped, he said, "My turn." He raised his arms and streams of fire rained down, dousing all the men around him. Tony set fire to everything, including his great pile of weapons. "Holy shit!" Clint exclaimed. "You're really lighting it up," Steve noted as Tony nodded. "Hell yeah," Peter said as he pumped his fist into the air happily while Benjamin and Aunt May shook their heads in amusement. One of the men fired at him from a mountainside as others followed. Tony staggered and sank to his feet before firing more streams of flames, but the explosives started going off. Tony flipped a red switch under his red arm and the suit propelled into the air as a mass explosion began below him. As great clouds of fire and smoke sailed towards the sky, Tony flew out in the suit and directed its flight away from the encampment. "Yeah!" Thor, Bruce, Professor Hulk and Peter cheered at the same time. "The first flight of Iron Man," Sam said. The suit suddenly lost power and Tony plunged towards the sand with a yell. "Oh," Natasha said. "Not the best first flight," Fury said. "It's okay. The Wright brothers failed too on their first try," Hill said. "Ouch," Pepper, Aunt May and Peter said at the same time as they saw the suit crashing. Tony was in the middle of the wreck of the suit. He pulled off the remaining pieces with a grunt and tumbled across the sand, his jacket over his head to keep off the sun. Just as he came to the top of a high ridge and was about to go down the other side of it, 2 helicopters soared over his head. He happily called out to them and waved. "Yes," Sam roared. "Was it you?" Steve asked Rhodes. "It was me," Rhodes confirmed. "Phew," Pepper sighed in relief as Tony looked at her and Rhodes with a smile. "I'm so glad you came," Tony told Rhodes gratefully, who nodded. 5 men came running out of one chopper as it landed, with Rhodes in the front. As Rhodes asked him about his comment on the Humvees earlier, Tony managed a weak smile. Rhodes hugged him fiercely and said, "Next time you ride with me, okay?" "There won't be a next time," Tony said. "Yup," Rhodes agreed. "Fortunate for you, bub," Logan told Tony. "How long has it been?" T'Challa asked. 3 months, Fury said. "A long time," Benjamin noted. "You were a changed man after this," Xavier said. "Not fully changed, but still change," Professor Hulk agreed. In the nearby room, Reed and his wife Susan Storm Richards were eating snacks together as they heard everyone's reactions to what they were viewing. "Looks like Tony has escaped," Sue noted. "Yup," Reed said, after building a suit in a cave with a box of scraps. "Which is very smart," Sue said, "almost as smart as you." "Yeah," Reed agreed, "I think the 2 of us are about equal." "1. We need him, don't we?" Sue asked. "Yeah," Reed agreed, My and his brain together can do a lot of things that mine alone can't. And now I'm back home," Tony commented. The U.S. Air Force One touched down, Pepper and Happy waiting for it in the airstrip. Pepper's eyes were flushed and her makeup was running. The ramp lowered, and inside the plane Rhodey pulled Tony to his feet and supported him as he slowly walked down the ramp. Tony's right arm was in a sling. Medical personnel came rushing up to him but he scoffed them with a dismissive gesture. Pepper rolled her eyes. Some things never change. Pepper smiled through her tears as Tony asked her if she was weeping for her long-lost boss, to which she replied she was weeping tears of joy as she hated job hunting. Tony told her vacation was over. "It's like you two were made for each other," Rhodes said as everyone snickered while Tony and Pepper blushed. The two sat in the car as Pepper asked Happy to drive them to the hospital but Tony refused, saying he wanted an American cheeseburger and call a press conference, much to Pepper's shock. "You and your cheeseburgers," Pepper sighed. "So this is the conference?" Steve asked and Tony nodded. "Bold move from a bold man," Fury said. When Happy pulled up to the curb, a number of well-dressed people were standing waiting to meet him. They began to applaud as soon as they saw the car, and Obadiah Stane sprang forward, arms outstretched. Obadiah greeted Tony happily as Happy gave him his second cheeseburger, with Obadiah wondering why Tony didn't meet him at the hospital. "Why, so you could stab me to death there?" Tony asked dryly. "He doesn't even feel guilty after seeing your condition," Peter commented. "No conscience in him, he won't," Natasha educated the boy. "She is right, Peter," Benjamin told him and he simply nodded. "Some people just want power for themselves. They don't care about who they hurt, bub," Logan told him. Tony and Obadiah entered the conference room as the reporters applauded. Pepper stood at the back of the room, wondering what he was going to do. Someone called out to her and she turned to see a middle-aged man standing next to her, requesting to speak to her for a moment. "Son of Cool," Thor called out. "Good old Coulson," Tony commented. "He was a nice guy," Pepper said. "Sure was," Tony agreed. "How you doin', Coulson?" Clint asked on screen Coulson randomly. "Wish he could answer that," Natasha noted absently. "Good to see him," Hill muttered to herself. Loki didn't say a word, knowing they would glare at him the moment he did. Fury didn't say anything either, as he knew what the others didn't. "Are you going to keep it a secret from them forever, Director Fury?" Fury was shocked to hear Xavier's voice in his head. He turned to see Xavier looking at him with a kind smile. Benjamin, Odinson and Logan looked at him and gave a simple nod before turning back to the screen. "They know," Fury thought to himself. 1. The man introduced himself as Agent Phil Coulson of Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division. Pepper commented that it was a mouthful, to which he replied they were working on it. "Didn't we already work on it?" Hill asked. The man had a sense of humor. Fury told everyone, too. Pepper said they had been visited by various agencies but Phil said they were a separate division with a more separate focus, saying they needed to debrief Tony about the circumstances of his escape. Pepper agreed to an appointment and he walked off with a, "Thank you." What an appointment that was, Pepper remembered with a shudder. Good thing that sort of thing never happened again, Tony agreed. Tony asked all the reporters to sit down so they could all see him and it would be a little less formal. He took a bite of his sandwich while the press actually sat down after looking quizzically at each other as Obadiah sat next to Tony. "They actually sat down?" Aunt May said incredulously. "It's me, remember?" Tony said and everyone rolled their eyes at his antics. "Yeah, we remember," Clint snarked dryly. "Mr. Stark has some kind of quality in him," Vision said. "Can't argue with that," Benjamin agreed. Rhodes walked up to Pepper to ask her of the matter but she had no idea. "I never got to say goodbye to my dad," Tony said to Obadiah. Bucky gulped as Natasha held his hand while Steve simply nodded at him. Tony then said the same thing to the audience before telling them how he would have asked him if he was conflicted over what his company did. Tony then said how he saw young Americans getting killed by the weapons created to defend and protect them, and how he was part of a system with zero accountability. "Americans?" Wanda asked with a raised eyebrow. "I didn't know the full deception that had been carried out behind my back during that time." Tony told her, "I'm sorry." 3. She simply nodded, letting the matter go for now. The reporters asked him the details of his abduction and he got up and walking to the podium, said he had his eyes opened, saying he could offer more to this world than blowing stuff up. He then began, and that is why, effective immediately, I am shutting down the weapons manufacturer division of Stark International. The crowd went wild at that declaration as Tony continued, until such a time as I can decide what the future of this company will be, what direction it should take. Whoa, Peter beamed. That was when you stopped making weapons. Thor noted as Stark simply nodded. It looked like a disaster though, Pepper noted of the conference. It really did. Sam agreed as he looked at the screen. Obadiah not so subtly pushed Tony off the microphone, joking about how many newspapers they will sell. One that I am comfortable with, and is consistent with the highest good for this country as well, finished Tony as he walked away from the podium. What a bombshell. Hill said. Obadiah must be feeling very screwed right now, Bruce commented. Rhodes had a mixed expression on his face as Obadiah tried to calm the situation, saying Tony was back. Yeah, I'm back, Tony said as everyone sighed. Later, outside the main Stark Industries factory, Obadiah came riding on a Segway with a cigarette in his mouth. As Happy took the Segway, Obadiah took the cigarette out of his mouth and using a keycard, went inside. Tony stood near the arc reactor prototype that powered the factory. That's pretty big, Bucky commented, summing up everyone's thoughts on it. Obadiah chastised Tony for what he had done, bringing up the stock drop. Obadiah said that they were weapons manufacturers so they needed to make weapons. Tony countered, saying he didn't want a body count to be his only legacy, to which Obi said they were ironmongers. Tony said it was his name on the side of the building as Obi said they kept the world from falling into chaos. Your name on the side of the building doesn't really mean much, Loki told Tony. So you blew my name up? Tony asked dryly. It was an accident. Thor shrugged. I mean, you should feel lucky the power I emanate isn't powerful enough to destroy the galaxy as a side effect. Now I wonder if I could make things happen with a word, Wanda said. That would make life very uninteresting, Tony said. Yeah, it would be too boring, Natasha agreed. 4. Obadiah wants to keep the world in chaos, Steve said. But I'm guessing he is delusional enough to believe that he is doing something good, Sam said. All villains are heroes of their own stories, Rhodes said. I actually agree with that, Peter said as he thought of Adrian Toomes. I got a specimen of that right here, Thor said as he clapped Loki on the back who looked annoyed and even ashamed of his past actions. Tony said he wanted them to do something else but Obadiah was having none of it. Tony then brought up the arc reactor, and Obi revealed he knew about it, making Tony unbutton his shirt to see it. Obadiah then told Tony that they were a team and they could do anything together, but he needed to lay low for a while. So that you can sell even more weapons behind our backs. Pepper snarled as everyone glared at Obadiah again. Later, Pepper we have Mad Money, where the host was mocking Stark Industries in a very cartoonish way that would come off as funny to anyone who was below 12 or below but cringeworthy to anyone who 13 or above. Look, that's a weapons company that doesn't make weapons, he mocked. Your Highness, please don't judge us by this, Steve said to T'Challa with a grimace. Everyone great country has some flaws in it, T'Challa simply said. Now I wonder why I even watched that thing in the first place, Pepper muttered. I know right, Tony himself said. Yeah, I didn't expect you to be watching this either, Sam told her. Watch some real news, Aunt May said. I don't think people do nowadays, Fury said. They do if it involves celebrities, Hill told him. 5. Suddenly, Tony's voice came from the Stark pad, asking her how big her hands were. She was confused until Tony repeated the question and said he needed her. Dude, she was your secretary, Sam said. Really, Mr. Stark? Aunt May asked, feeling a bit disgusted. It wasn't that kind of job, Tony said. What? Bruce asked. Continue watching, Pepper simply said. When Pepper keyed herself into Tony's workshop, a shirtless Tony was reclining on a chair next to a rather ominous-looking monitor, to which he was connected by way of 3 cords. One red, one blue, and one white. He was holding another arc reactor that looked slightly different from the one he was currently using. I'm sorry for judging you, Sam said simply, though he still rightfully held a grudge for the airport fight. Me too, Aunt May said. Apology accepted, Tony shrugged. This looks much worse, Thor said. Good thing I had to do it only once, Pepper said. What? Peter asked. Keep watching, Tony simply said. At Tony's request, Pepper showed him her hands and he commented on how small and petite they were. She was astonished by the arc reactor already inside his chest. He told her he was upgrading it for another one and needed her help with a short wire. He took out the arc reactor from his chest and had her put it somewhere else before he made her lift the wire, saying she was the most capable, qualified, trustworthy people he had ever met. Adorable moment ruined by the fact somebody could die right now, Rhodes said. I find it adorable, disgusting and tense at the same time, Aunt May said. Pepper reached in but was disgusted by the pus, though Tony replied it was an inorganic plasmic discharge from the device, not that it made her feel any better. She got the wire but it touched the sides, making a zzz noise. She managed to pull it out, but she also pulled out the magnet, making the monitor beep madly as Tony started going into cardiac arrest. Pepper comforted Tony and managed to put the other arc reactor into him just in the nick of time, making him yelp. Pepper told Tony not to ask her to do that ever again. Wanda slightly gagged at Pepper's memory of the incident. But Mr. Stark said it was safe, Peter said out loud. If Tony says something is safe, then trust me it isn't. Natasha educated the young boy and everyone nodded in agreement. Discharge from the device is even worse than pus, Bruce said. Couldn't agree more. Professor Hulk said. It's like you believe you have 9 lives or something, bub. Trust me, you don't. Logan told him. What if I do? Tony shrugged. You don't. I know someone who does, Benjamin told him. 6. I don't have anyone but you. Tony told her with unusual sincerity as he stared at her. Ah, Scott said and Hope smacked his arm again. It's cute, Scott said. Doesn't mean you have to behave like a little girl. Hope shrugged as everyone laughed. As he got up, he told her to burn the previous arc reactor or throw it away, saying he wasn't nostalgic. She walked off when he told her he didn't need anything else. Pepper walked off as Tony asked a robot who had been sitting above him the entire time to clear the stuff on his desk. Now that's a good boy, Tony said. Rhodes was giving a demonstration to a line of cadets in a military hangar when Tony arrived and started making jokes about him, making the cadets laugh, though Rhodey asked him not to do that. The cadets walked off a while later as Rhodes commented on how surprised he was to see Tony walking around. You shouldn't be walking around like that, Bruce said. He doesn't care. Professor Hulk said. Tony told Rhodes he was working on something big and wanted him to be a part of it. Rhodes wondered if the press conference was a doozy but Tony said it was something else, making Rhodes wonder if he was a humanitarian now. He asked Tony to get his mind right. Tony simply grimaced. You thought I had PTSD, Tony said. Didn't you? Rhodes asked and Tony sighed, realizing he shouldn't be making jokes about that. Later, Tony brushed a hand over his holographic keyboard and asked Jarvis if he was up, to which he replied he always was. Hello, Jarvis. Wanda simply said. While I am him, I consider myself very different, Vision said. Tony then moved a holographic image of the suit to a holotable and told Jarvis to store it on his private server as he didn't know who to trust in the company. He moved some parts away and threw them into a holographic dustbin. Wow, that is so awesome, Peter said, looking at the technology. Compared to this device, not that much, Logan said. Hey, Tony said. He's got a point, Fury agreed. Yes, Mr. Stark. A device that can record memories and a time travel device are much more impressive than that or anything in Wakanda, T'Challa said. Tony sighed and looked at the screen, feeling humbled. In the desert, men wearing masks were digging up remains of Stark's first suit. One of them picked up his mask and called the bald leader, the right side of whose face was blistered and burnt. No more than you deserve. Rhodes said. Good work, Iron Man, Pepper said as she and Tony high-fived. And now they're going to try to remake it, Steve sighed. The bald leader took the mask and studied it closely. I doubt he has the brains to make that, Aunt May said. Yeah, good luck. Hill agreed. In his workshop, Tony was working on the lower part of his suit which he called the boot, with Dummy trying to help. But it was subpar worker as Tony kept scolding him relentlessly. I feel bad for Dummy, Wanda said. Did its feeling ever get hurt? Natasha asked randomly. No, Tony said. Yes. Vision told him. Poor Dummy, Aunt May said. "Why didn't you replace it?" Banner asked. "Looks like someone is nostalgic after all," Sam whispered to Steve, Natasha and Bucky. The next scene was shown through the camera of another bot called U. Tony had a boot on each foot with guards on his arms and metal handlebars in his hands. He stepped back on a large grid on the floor, and as the bots started working on his command, he tried to fly at 10% thrust capacity, only for the split-second surge power to propel him through the air as his feet flew over his head and he banged into the ceiling, before falling down with a crash. Dumb E blew a cloud of steam at Tony. Everyone burst out laughing hard at the scene. "You okay there?" Pepper asked him. "Maybe," Tony said. Later, Tony worked on his computer and formed a holographic gauntlet, slipping his arm into it. Later, he made a skeleton of that to test as Pepper arrived and, dropping a box, told him Obadiah was upstairs. When she inquired about the gauntlet, he said it was a harmless flight stabilizer, but when he tried to use it, he was blasted back as Pepper covered her ears. "Harmless? Yeah, right," Natasha said. "I believe you now," Peter told her. "You're a fast learner, kid," Fury told him. "You definitely own the mad scientist, Tony," Bruce told him, referring to the conversation they had had before creating Vision. Tony went upstairs to see Obadiah playing the piano and realized it went bad as he saw the pizza. He started eating it as Obi told him the board of directors were filing an injunction due to his PTSD. Pepper told him the stock had dipped 50, said he still had the controlling interest, but Obi pointed out the board had rights too. After some arguing, Tony decided to go off with the pizza. Obi asked Tony for the arc reactor, but he refused, so he took back the pizza, though he still let Tony have a slice before he walked back to his shop. "He wants it so much already," Hill said. "Greed," Pepper snarled. "He must have been the one who filed," Steve said. "Yup," Tony said. Later, Tony stood in front of his bots again, and after berating Dumb E a little, he tried to fly at 1% thrust capacity, and this time, to his own shock, he managed to get a stable flight, though he was still thrown sideways a few times. "And you've done it," Rhodes said. "That's me," Tony shrugged, and everyone sighed. Tony tried to fly again at 2.5 thrust capacity and struggled more than before, but still managed to fly and land safely. "Yeah, I can fly," Tony said. "Cute." Thor shrugged. "You're gods, right?" Tony asked, and Thor shrugged again. Later, Tony put a suit around himself. It was plain silver but very recognizable, the Mark II. "Hell yeah!" Peter cheered as everyone glimpsed the Mark II for the first time. Inside the helmet, bright lights began flashing as icons appeared. "So that's what it looks like inside," Steve muttered. Jarvis was uploaded into the suit as Tony examined the workshop and started walking. Tony wanted to go outside, but Jarvis tried to object, only for Tony to say, "Jarvis, sometimes you gotta run before you can walk. And sometimes you should walk first," Vision protested. "Classic, reckless Tony," Natasha said. Tony started flying and soared out of the garage. "My first proper flight," Tony said. "Nothing beats that feeling." "I agree," Rhodes said. "You're very good at flying," Thor said. Tony soared into the air, flying around the city. Two kids saw him and one dropped his ice cream in shock. Tony flew higher into the air, but the suit had a fatal buildup of ice, making him fall down, though he managed to deploy flaps in the nick of time. He flew through the city and reached on the top of his building. Just as he depowered his suit, he crashed through several floors into his garage, with Dumb E blowing on the suit to thaw it. "Epic fail," Scott shouted as everyone laughed. "The icing problem had its advantages," Tony simply said. Later, as Tony used an ice pack on his head, he saw the box Pepper had dropped. It had a note with, "From Pepper," written on it. He removed the note and opened it, to see a glass case, and inside it was the first arc reactor. Around it were engraved the words, "Proof that Tony Stark has a heart." A smile spread across his face. A smile spread across Tony's face. "Ah," Natasha of all people said this time. "That was very thoughtful, Miss Potts," Aunt May told her as she blushed. Rhodes made kissing noises and Tony said, "Shut up. I have a feeling we're about to see some very interesting stuff now," Tony said. "Right you are, Mr. Stark," Charles told him. In Afghanistan, two Ten Rings terrorists argued over the construction of the pieces of the first Iron Man suit as the bald leader looked on with a critical eye. They don't have the technology to get it right, do they? Sam asked. Even if they did, they won't have the brains, Fury pointed out. What's the name of the bald guy? Peter asked. His name would be Raza, bub, Logan said. Tony looked at the digital mask on his screen in the workshop and commented on several problems, including the icing problem. Jarvis said that they should improve the exosystems if he intended to visit other planets. Everyone laughed at the AI's wit. You're very witty, Odinson told him. Was I really that witty? Vision asked. Who made you again? Tony asked with a laugh. After telling some solutions, Tony's attention was attracted by the television in the corner. It was about his own third annual benefit for the Firefighters Family Fund. Tony asked Jarvis if he had gotten an invite, to which the AI replied in the negative. As Tony looked at the damaged mask of his second suit, the announcer said that no one expected Tony to show up. And he has jinxed it. Pepper said. Jinxes? You really believe in that bullshit? Logan asked. Everyone has got to believe in something, James, Steve told him. It's Logan, Captain. Logan said. Logan. Steve corrected himself. What do you believe in? I believe that, Logan started, I am the best there is at what I do. But what I do isn't very nice. Steve simply nodded with a sigh, realizing how hard life must have been for Logan in all the years he had been alive. Jarvis completed the render of the suit, but it was in bright gold, so Tony asked him to change the color by throwing in a little hot rod red, which the AI did. The render was complete and Jarvis told him the estimated completion time was 5 hours. Tony told the AI not to wait for him. Now that's what I am talking about, Tony said. The render itself is pretty good, Rhodes told him. Which is why the finished product was even better, Professor Hulk told them. Later, Tony sped down the road in a silver sports car with a nameplate that read Stark 4. He pulled up alongside the curb of the concert hall and stepped out, wearing a business suit. Obadiah Stane was being interviewed. And there he is. Hill sighed. Weapons manufacturing may be a small part of Stark Industries, but that is the only one you care about, Sam said. Some people only care about power and position, T'Challa sighed. Everyone cheered on seeing Tony as one of the women asked if he remembered her, to which he replied he didn't. He patted an elderly man with a cigar and good-looking women around him on the shoulder. You look great, Hef. Tony said as the man turned around to reply, but the billionaire was already gone. Him? Thor asked with a horrified look. You know him, brother? Loki asked in surprise. He is the one who cut my hair, Thor said. What? Tony asked in surprise. How could he have done that? I think he is a neighbor of mine, Peter said. Really? I don't remember him, Aunt May said. But if he is your neighbor, how can he be at this party? Pepper asked. And how can he cut my hair? Thor said. We have seen all the recordings at least once, Odinson said, and for some reason, he appears in all of them in some different role. Who he is, we don't know either, Benjamin said. Maybe he is a watcher or something, Natasha shrugged. A watcher? Logan wondered. I like the sound of that, Clint said. One? I think he shows up at a lot of places, Fury said as he looked at the man suspiciously. Well, to be honest, I like your hair, Thor. Natasha told him as he smiled, so it looks like he hasn't done anything sinister. Which is a good thing. Professor Hulk said. Some mysteries will never be solved, Bruce sighed. Tony greeted Obadiah, who was surprised on seeing him. Tony then went inside as Obadiah said the board was at a good place now. Tony went up to the bar inside and asked for a scotch, only for someone to call out to him. He turned to see Phil Coulson walking towards him. There he is again. Steve sighed. He looks calm and collected here, Natasha said, but he fanboyed over you a lot. Tony once again told Phil he needed to work on the name of his organization, though it had already been worked on. Coulson asked for an appointment. Tony wasn't paying any attention now though. He had spotted Pepper, who was in a light blue satin backless evening gown. Look at that, Scott said. That looks really good on you, Hope complimented as Pepper blushed. Yes, you look very good, Aunt May said too. Gift from Stark, right? Natasha asked as Pepper nodded. That's me, Stark said with a smirk. Asgardian women would be jealous of your look, Thor complimented her. Tony shook Coulson's hand while staring at Pepper and agreed before walking up to Pepper. He told her she looked so fantastic he didn't recognize her. Tony asked her about the dress and she told him it was a birthday present from him of all people. Classic, forgetful Stark, Natasha said this time as everyone laughed. Tony asked for a dance and after some hesitation, she agreed. Tony swung her like a pro as she bit her lip nervously. Tony asked if he was making her uncomfortable, to which she replied that she always forgot to wear deodorant and dance with her boss in front of everyone she worked with in a dress with no back. Pepper winced involuntarily at that. Tony told her she looked and smelled great and then the two exchanged some witty banter about how long he would last without her. She asked him his social security number and he fumbled for the answer. Told you? Natasha smirked as she and Sam high-fived. You really don't know your own social security number? Bruce asked in amusement. Still don't. Tony shrugged. You should, Aunt May told him sternly. Pepper became nervous again and the two agreed to get some air. The two went off as Phil Coulson looked after them. The two argued again about how harmless the dance was, with Pepper saying how he was her boss so it would make her look bad. Tony was deflated and tried to calm her down. Without realizing, the two took a step forward as their heads came together. But then they realized what they were doing as Pepper asked for a drink. Oh, snap, Rhodes said. That didn't go very well, Wanda muttered dryly. She asked for a vodka martini with 3 olives and Tony walked off to get 2 from the bartender, with his dirty. That moment, Christine Everhart walked up to Tony, wearing a black dress, saying it was fancy seeing him there. Great. Scott groaned, her again. Fancy seeing a man at his own party, Tony said snarkily. She hates you, doesn't she? Pepper asked. Yup, Tony said. Won't blame her. Clint whispered to himself. She said he had a lot of nerve showing up and asked for a reaction, to which he replied panic. Christine wasn't pleased and gave him some printed pictures, saying they were of a town called Gulmira. Gulmira? Thor asked in a growl, making Loki a bit nervous. That's how you found out? Bruce asked. That's how I found out, Tony said. Well, someone is going to be very screwed now, Bruce said. Tony looked at the pictures in shock. There was death and devastation all around, with the terrorists carrying a smaller version of the Jericho missile. Wanda could feel the real Tony's fury at the reminder. Christine said they had been taken the previous day, shocking Tony as he hadn't approved of any shipment. Christine pointed out his company had, which made him stride past her to Obadiah outside who shooed away some reporters. Tony inquired about the pictures and asked if they were double-dealing under the table. Obadiah simply said they should take a picture and they did. Though Tony's eyes looked like could blister the concrete of the steps under the carpet. Obadiah told Tony he had file detect him before walking off. To protect him? Pepper snarled angrily. To double deal more, Tony snarked. You don't even look irritated or disappointed, Rhodes told him. He looks like he is ready to go to war, Thor noted. Good observation. Odinson told him. And now you're complimenting yourself. Loki said dryly as the two Thors chuckled. The truth has come out, Steve said, and it won't end well for some, T'Challa noted. That was the business he wanted to handle, Professor Hulk said. He is so screwed now, Bruce said. He sure is, Benjamin agreed. Later, Tony was twirling with a screwdriver at a part of the glove of his new red and gold suit as he watched the news on the TV about the death and destruction in Gulmira. The news reporter described it as a descent into hell, into a modern-day heart of darkness. The flight stabilizer in the palm began to glow as Tony watched live footage of armed men making their way into the ruins of the town. He also spotted Raza standing in the ruins. Tony's face was an emotionless mask but the fury he was feeling inside was visible. When the Jericho missile appeared on the screen, Tony's metal-gloved hand clenched and he stood up. Tony's look matched that of his on-screen self. Pepper glanced at him a little uneasily. Wanda had to forcefully squash down her own memory of what she had gone through at the scene she was witnessing. Loki looked away in shame, reminded of what the Chitauri had done when he had brought them down to New York. Thor put a hand on his shoulder in support and he nodded in appreciation. Aunt May held Peter tightly on witnessing that, afraid that she would somehow lose him to atrocities like that. Tony walked around the couch he had been sitting on and threw the screwdriver away. As the news continued, Tony raised his arm, his palm held out in front of him. He aimed it at the other side of the garage and fired. After that, He walked into the middle of the room, in full view of the glass panels, as the news continued. He looked at his own reflection with self-loathing and fired at all the panels, shattering them into pieces. The viewers did not miss the significance of that. Tony was blasting his own reflection due to self-loathing. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Rhodes gasped. "Jesus," Scott muttered. Tony then walked onto a black grid which opened in pieces around his feet, and came up to the boot and leg pieces of Iron Man Mark III, all red and gold, and fastened over his feet and around his legs. A large yellow bot reached down with the front and back plates, the arc reactor glowing as the chest plate slammed down over it, and then came the arms and hands. Last of all came the sides of the helmet, the mask closing over his face and the eyeholes glowing. "This looks better," Steve said. "Yes, Peter." Bruce and Thor cheered happily as Aunt May shook her head in amusement. "You're going to Gulmira?" Sam asked. "Yup," Tony said. "I remember that." Rhodes sighed. Tony, in his Iron Man Mark III armor, soared through the skies. In Gulmira, the villagers were running around in terror as shots rang around them. Armed men kicked open doors of homes and fired into them. They grabbed all men who ran past, tearing them from their families, and shoved the women and children to their comrades. Roz's bearded thug was shouting orders. A family of 4 with a little girl and a slightly bigger boy were being hustled out when one of the children tipped and all 4 of them fell down. The leader ordered his men to grab the father. One of the men did as the boy broke away from his mother and sister and ran back to him. The father broke free of the grip of the man and ran to his boy, the two hugging each other tightly as the leader marched up to them and threw the boy off. "Get your hands off him, you bastard," Aunt May of all people roared in a rage as everyone looked at her in shock, Peter included. This was the wrath of a mother who saw innocent children getting hurt. Peter was pale and Wanda saw in his memory the closest thing he ever had to a father bleeding to death at the back of a street in Queens. Aunt May held him tightly. Wanda was stiff herself, memories of her parents and Pietro making her eyes water. Vision held her hand tightly to provide comfort. Steve, Bucky and Logan were shaking with rage, reminded of the cruelty in the concentration camps. "I wish I could have got my hands on them," Rhodes snarled angrily. "You're not the only one," Sam said. Natasha's blood was boiling at the scene. While she never had a family as a child, she would never wish the same upon anyone. "Bastard." Clint snarled at the screen too, thinking about how many ways he would use to kill this man and others like him who would dare to hurt his family. "Burn in hell," Thor said angrily. "Trust me, they are," Odinson said with a dark gleam in his eye. In all times, one thing that has remained a constant unfortunately is people's capacity to feel hatred for other people, Xavier said sadly. Hill looked horrified at the scene as well, with Fury's face an emotionless mask. Tony's expression was the same as his on-screen self earlier as Pepper held his hand tightly, horrified by what was going on in Gulmira in the screen. "Jesus," Scott said uneasily as he thought of Cassie in this situation. Hope held his hand to offer comfort, uneasy herself as she remembered losing her mother. The children and the mother sobbed as the father was forced to his knees and was about to be shot down. The boy was calling out to his father tearfully when everyone heard a sound like thunder, and villagers and attackers alike looked up at the sky to see a red and gold blur descending down on them. Tony landed on his left foot and right knee, straightening up to face the man who was going to shoot the father. "Just in time," Thor said. "Now they will burn in hell," Loki said. "No more than they deserve," Fury agreed. "You guys are so screwed now," Bruce said. "Like you wouldn't believe," Professor Hulk said. The man fired vainly at the suit, which charged at him and sent him flying off into the ruins of a house with a single punch. He then fired his repulsor beams in quick succession at 3 of them, sending them flying off. He turned around to fire a 4th one but saw the terrorists holding the villagers hostage. "Cowards," Steve spat. "What are you going to do now?" Pepper asked. "Cut the wire," Tony said with a gleam in his eye as Steve shot him a curious look which he returned and everyone realized it was something between the two of them. Only Thor, Natasha, Bruce and Fury knew what it was. Tony lowered his palms as Jarvis identified the civilians and attackers with icons on the screen. Once it had been done, a small row of miniature guns rose from Tony's shoulders and shot down all the armed men, leaving the villagers intact. "Hell yeah!" Peter cheered. They got what they deserved, Aunt May said. Sure did. Loki of all people agreed. You did good as well. Wanda told Vision, who was Jarvis back then, and he nodded in appreciation. Thank you, Wanda. He said. The boy ran up to his father and the two hugged tightly. Peter discreetly wiped his eyes as Aunt May patted his head lovingly. Wanda did the same as Vision put an arm around her. The boy saw Tony in the suit walking past them. The bearded thug was hiding behind a wall, trying to dial for help, when a red metal fist burst through the wall, startling him. It grabbed him and yanked him back through the hole, throwing him to the civilians. Shoot that dog, Fury said. With pleasure, Hill agreed. I wish I could do it. Clint sighed. He got an even better punishment, Tony said. Tony flew into the air and told the villagers, he's all yours. As he flew off, the villagers surrounded the bearded thug who looked back at them in fear. This is even better, Natasha said cheerfully. I wish we could see what they did to him, Thor said. Scott started, I wish I could go up into his nostril and X, too. Don't finish that sentence, Hope said as she smacked his arm and everyone laughed tense watching the action in Gulmira. Tony flew through the air, identifying the Jericho missile, when he was hit by a missile and thrown out of the sky. He crashed into the ground, forming a small crater. Ouch, Rhodes said, reminded of his own fall, which was much worse. Tony climbed out of the crater and surveyed the site. As a tank fired at him, he leaned sideways to dodge before lifting his arm and firing a small missile, destroying it. He walked away as the tank exploded behind him. Badass. Peter smiled. As men fired at him, he flew up into the air and looked down on them. He fired at the Jericho missile. The explosion killed all the men and destroyed all the weapons as Raza and more men arrived in trucks, watching the explosion with astonishment and horror. Tony flew off. At Edwards Air Force Base, California, the military watched their screens as they saw a blinking red dot, wondering what that was. When they discovered it wasn't the Air Force, Navy or Marines, Major Allen asked to get Rhodes. Now the military is interfering? Pepper asked in amazement. They want to take credit for my work, Tony said as he shot Rhodes a look who sighed in annoyance. They never got the green light, really? Steve muttered. You have no idea how much people of power try to control the military these days. Rhodes sighed sadly. Tell me about it. Bruce groaned. As Tony soared through the clouds, Rhodes walked into the intelligence room at the base, wondering how the thing had appeared out of nowhere and not shown on the radar. Too small, Scott said, and everyone laughed at his shrink jokes. As the major asked him what they were dealing with, Rhodes decided to make a call. While Tony was flying, a shrill ringtone sounded inside his helmet. He accepted the call, asking who it was as he couldn't hear due to the noise. Jarvis put Rhodes' credentials on the screen as the colonel told him that a weapons depot had been blown up a few clicks away from where he had been held captive. Tony said someone did his job for him. As Rhodes asked him about the noise and his out-of-breath voice, he said he had been driving to the Grand Canyon where he was now going to jog. Jogging in the Grand Canyon? Peter asked innocently. Yeah, that's believable, Bruce said, and I thought Steve was a bad liar, Natasha muttered. There was a lot of noise there, Tony said. I know, Rhodes agreed. Rhodes asked him if he had any tech there, to which Tony replied in the negative. As the bogey was spotted, Rhodes told him they were about to blow it up. Tony cut the call as two planes flew after him. He flew off at supersonic speed. Whoa, Peter said, supersonic? Yup, Tony said. I'm beginning to think your father was wrong about the Iron Man suit, Scott told Hope, who simply nodded. One of the planes fired a missile at him, but he deployed flares and they made the missile explode behind him. He started falling before the suit picked itself back up. One plane fired bullets at him and he avoided, though they scraped the metal of the suit. He deployed flaps and two planes shot past him, shocking the pilots. Rhodes got a call from Tony and, accepting it, berated him for sending civilian equipment into his war zone, to which Tony replied it was a suit with him inside it. And cat's out of the bag, Sam said. Just in the nick of time, Rhodes agreed. The pilot of one of the planes spotted Tony on the underside of the other one and called out that it looked like a man. The pilot twisted his joystick and the plane rolled through the air. Tony lost the hold and crashed into the wing of Whiplash 1, breaking it off. Oh, Aunt May said. You okay? Pepper asked. Yup. Tony sighed. The military men stared in horror as the plane spun out of control. The pilot pulled the yellow handle and shot out of the plane just before it exploded. Still bolted to his chair, he fell through the sky, unable to open his chute which was jammed. Tony suddenly flew down. Major Allen commanded the other pilot to fire in spite of Rhodes' protests. Tony reached the falling pilot and punched the compartment open, with the chute coming out. He flew off as the pilot landed safely to the relief of the military men. Tony thanked Rhodes on the phone, who gasped with a laugh. Rhodes asked what excuse he should give to the press, to which Tony replied, training exercise. Nobody buys that anymore. Rhodes said. They did back then, Tony said. I'm beginning to think my father was a bit wrong about Tony too. Hope sighed. 3. Sometime later, Rhodes lied to the press with the training exercise excuse as Obadiah watched the thing on TV. He definitely didn't buy it, Pepper said, because he is smart, Steve said. In the workshop, Pepper made her way down to the stairs and gaped at seeing the broken glass panels. She looked up to see a bot removing Tony's suit painfully piece by piece. She asked what was going on and he turned to see her. He tried to defuse the situation, but she was horrified on looking at the suit and asked, "Are those bullet holes busted?" Hope said as everyone chuckled slightly. "I can relate," Peter said as him and Aunt May exchanged a knowing smirk. "This is not going to be pleasant," T'Challa said. "Right you are, Your Highness," Tony told him. "Yup," Pepper agreed. "The suit had to be removed piece by piece?" Aunt May asked in surprise. "Not anymore," Tony said. "It got really cool and advanced later," Professor Hulk said, once again thinking of the bleeding edge armor. "Let us see what happens next," Steve said. "It is about to get very interesting, bub," Logan told him as they continued watching. "Now we're on to some very interesting stuff," Benjamin said as everyone watched on. It was night time in Afghanistan. A row of black SUVs rolled up near the new camp of the Ten Rings and Obadiah walked out as Raza approached him. "Now this is something I needed to see," Tony said. "Me too," Pepper agreed. "The villains making their deals," Steve said. Raza said the scars were compliments of Tony Stark. "Best compliments people like you will get from me," Tony said. Obadiah mocked him for his incompetence with a smile, saying he should have killed Stark like told, to which Raza replied that he wouldn't kill a prince for just some trinkets. At Obadiah's request, Raza decided to show him the suit as he left his guards outside. The guards looked like they would come to blows. "Well, they look friendly," Peter joked. Obadiah and Raza walked into the tent and saw the reconstituted Mark I armor. Obadiah started examining it as Raza said this was a crude first effort and Stark had perfected his design. "Upgraded. Still not perfected," Tony said. Raza said a man with dozens of those armors could rule all of Asia while Stain could get Stark's throne. Raza decided they were still in business due to their common enemy. Pouring a drink into his cup, he raised it and said that he would give Obadiah the designs as a gift and in return, get a gift of iron soldiers. "He doesn't look like he is interested," Sam said. "My throne, that's a laugh," Stark said. "Stark Industries knows no king but the king in the north whose name is Stark," Scott joked and everyone laughed. "You really have a thing for shows that have gone downhill," Hope commented. "You have no ground to stand on. You defend the series finale of Lost," Scott said and she had a look of mock offense on her face. 1. "Hey," she said, "at least the characters had emotional payoffs." "Nothing was explained," Scott said, "at least Sansa and Arya got great endings and Ghost got petted." "Still, D&D ruined it," Stark said, "and the series finale of Lost is horrible too." "Couldn't agree more," Pepper said too. "Haven't seen that show yet," Peter said. "I will let you watch when you're 18, Aunt May told him. "I don't think you should," Natasha said. "Yeah, it is just a waste of a show at this point due to the last 2 seasons, Rhodes said too. "You actually remind me of it, Point Break," Tony told Thor. "You 2 reindeer games. You even had fights for your thrones so you can relate." "I can relate too," T'Challa said. "I guess so," Thor said. "Let's not discuss the fights for the throne," Loki said. "I agree," Odinson said. "Let's focus, guys," Benjamin said. Obadiah put his hand on Raza's shoulder and pressed a small object that shone a bright light on Raza's face. exposing his nerves and paralyzing him, as Obadiah said this was his only gift and that technology was their Achilles heel in this part of the world. Walking off, Obadiah said it would last for 15 minutes. Walking out of the tent, Obadiah told his men to crate the armor. His guards had the terrorists on their knees and on Stain's order, shot them down. Stain then sat on the backseat of his car and ordered that he wanted the top engineers to make a prototype. "Evil always sells out evil," Logan said. "Yes," Xavier agreed. "No sympathy for Raza though," Clint said. "Agreed," Bucky said too. "Now Stain will get his," Fury said. "Let's see," Hill said. "He wants a prototype of the first suit now," Thor said. "The suit still looks good all things considered," Bruce said. "It sure does," Tony said. "Totally agreed," Professor Hulk said too. Pepper walked into the lab to see Tony working on the Mark III suit and handing her a drive. He asked her to hack into the mainframe in the office and retrieve all the shipping manifests, giving her all the instructions. Pepper asked what he was going to do, to which he replied he would destroy his weapons. Pepper said she would help him with anything, but she couldn't do it if he was going to start all of it again. "Why wouldn't you help him?" Aunt May asked. "Because the last time he had gotten mixed up with the 10 Rings, he was missing for 3 months. Pepper pointed out and everyone nodded, realizing Pepper cared about Tony too much. Tony held her hand and she squeezed back. Tony told her there was nothing except this now. Only the next mission. Pepper then said that she quit and throwing away the drive, started walking off. "You stood by my side all those years while I reaped the benefits of destruction," said Tony, making her stop and turn around in the doorway, "and now that I'm trying to protect the people that I put in harm's way, you're going to walk out?" Pepper said he was going to kill himself and she wasn't going to be a part of that. Tony said he shouldn't be alive unless there was a reason. Looking at her with conviction, he said, "I just finally know what I have to do. And I know in my heart that it's right." Pepper gave a long sigh and finally picked up the drive. "You're all I have too, you know," she said before walking off. Steve seemed to realize why Tony and Pepper had taken a break during the fiasco with the Sokovia Accords and Bucky. Everyone realized that Pepper was as alone in this world as Tony. Scott started, "That was intense?" Sam asked and he nodded. "Things are about to get very interesting," Tony said. "Right you are, bub," Logan said. Pepper blew out her breath, "Here goes." Pepper walked towards Tony's office, seeing all the assistant offices empty. She walked inside and shut the door before sitting down in front of the computer and pulling out the drive which she plugged into the USB port. After access was granted to her, she was brought to a ghost drive. She clicked some files, seeing shipping transactions before seeing a file with a number of images of the Mark I with sector 16 inches on top of them. "The suit he was working on," Steve said and Tony nodded. She then saw a video and clicked on it. It saw Tony slumped in a chair as the 10 Rings terrorists surrounded him with guns pointed at him and one of them read the ransom note. "That's the video they shot at the beginning," Peter said and everyone nodded. That was when Pepper was startled by a voice and looked up to see Obadiah standing there. "Shit," Sam said. "He had to show up at this time," Rhodes said in panic. "Why does the universe have to make everything difficult?" Hope said. "Because the universe hates us," Scott sighed. "There is some truth to that," Benjamin said. Tony himself looked distressed. More distressed than even Pepper. The two held each other's hands tightly. Obadiah poured himself a drink and walking towards her, said how Tony always got the good stuff. Pepper just smiled and nodded and when Obadiah looked up, she hid the drive with a paper. "Way to make it obvious," Fury said. Obadiah poured himself a second glass and came around the desk just as Pepper copied the last of the files and clicked on screensaver. "Holy shit," Bruce said. "I share your sentiments," Professor Hulk said too. "Phew," Peter sighed in relief. "It was close," Hill said. "Too close," Natasha agreed. "You cut it real close, Pepper," Clint said. "You okay?" Tony asked her. "I'm still here, remember," Pepper said with a smile which he returned. "Isn't Obadiah invading your personal space?" Hope noted to Pepper. Obadiah said how Tony had left a part of himself in the cave and Pepper said he was a complicated person. "Sure is," Wanda said. Pepper said he would be all right and Stain told her she was a rare woman and Tony was very lucky. "Now he has to flirt?" Aunt May said incredulously. Peter was tense himself as he watched the tense moment. Pepper unplugged the drive and started walking out, only for Obadiah to ask for the paper, which she handed to him. He looked at them as she walked off and looked at the drive. "Couldn't you have waited to look at it until you were out of sight?" Natasha asked in horror as she watched the scene. "She is an assistant, not a SHIELD agent," Clint told her. "Good point. She can sit." Vision pointed out. "I made it," Pepper said. "Which is a great thing," Tony said. As soon as Pepper was out of sight, Obadiah opened the computer to see the words, "Download complete." He ran his hand over his head and practically leapt to his feet. "Uh-oh," Sam said. Pepper made her way down the stairs when Phil Coulson called out to her. He asked her if she had forgotten about their appointment, to which she replied he needed to come with her right now. Coulson found himself nearly running to keep up with her as she told him she was going to give him the meeting of his life as Obadiah watched from above. Thor growled at him, "You lay one finger on her and I will lighten you up." "Too late for that, aren't you?" Loki asked with a smirk. "Nice to see myself all enthusiastic again," Odinson commented to Thor. "Thor, I am here," Pepper pointed out. "Thank God for Coulson," Steve said. "Indeed," Fury agreed. "I have a bad feeling about this," Scott said. "You're not wrong," Tony told him. Obadiah strode into Sector 16 as all but one of the assistants fled. He told Stain that there was a hiccup: the technology to power the suit didn't exist. "It does," Tony said. Stain's hand went around the assistant's shoulders and he invaded his personal space, saying the technology was here and he only needed to make it smaller. "I can do that," Scott joked and everyone laughed. The assistant said they were trying to do that and Obadiah thundered at him as he poked at his chest. "Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave, with a box of scraps." "Damn right," Fury said. "Well, he is pissed," Rhodes said. The assistant, whose name was William, apologized. "Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not Tony Stark. I'm the best," Tony said with spread hands, and no one felt like calling him out on it. Tony walked into his lounge and accepted a call from Pepper when a familiar buzzing sound immobilized him. Stain took the phone and hung up, easing Tony onto the couch and showing him the device that he had used to paralyze Raza. "Great," Sam groaned. "That thing again," Peter said. "The universe doesn't make things easy," Xavier said. Wanda actually felt worried for Tony. If someone had told her just a day ago that she would be worried for Tony, she would have laughed at that person's face as she rightfully held a grudge against him for the house arrest. But she could see he was a complex individual who was good at his core. "You okay?" Pepper asked Tony. "I am here, remember?" Tony said this time as the two smiled at each other. Obadiah boasted about the hit he had put on Tony and putting a device on his chest, pulled the arc reactor out. He asked Tony if he really thought an idea belonged to him just because he had it. "I think it does belong to him," Vision said. "Agreed," Wanda said too. Obadiah said how Howard had helped give the world the atomic bomb and the world wouldn't be this good if he had been as selfish as his son. He yanked the cable up, the magnet dangling at its end. "No," Pepper cried out as Tony squeezed her hand. "I'm here," he whispered to her. "The magnet," Scott said. "The shrapnel," Bruce said. "Oh my God. Oh my God," Peter was repeating to himself. Steve was watching the scene with wide eyes, worried for Tony. Obadiah said this was Tony's legacy: a new generation of weapons with the arc reactor at its heart. Tony choked and gasped as some blood leaked out of his ear, and Obadiah said the weapons would put the balance of power in his hands, which were the right ones. "Do you even hear yourself?" Rhodes said. "He is insane," Sam said. "All villains are heroes of their own story," Peter said. "He believes he is doing this for the greater good of humanity," Natasha said. "But he just wants more money and more power," Clint finished. "He is too self-righteous to see that," Aunt May said. "Right you are," Fury agreed. He smiled smugly, wishing Tony could see his prototype as he put the arc reactor in a black suitcase, and said it was a shame Tony had involved Pepper, as he would have preferred if she lived. Tony's eyes slid over to him, the fury and distress visible in spite of the paralysis as Obadiah walked off. Steve growled, "Don't you dare," just when I thought he couldn't sink any lower, Hill said. Thor growled, his growl like the low rumble of faraway lightning. "Coward. Even I wouldn't do that," Loki said. I wouldn't spare anyone who said something like that to me, Clint snarked. Me neither, Scott said. How are you going to survive this one? Wanda asked. You will see. Tony told her. This is getting more and more intense, Hope said. Yup. Professor Hulk agreed. Rhodes was driving his car when Pepper told him everything over the phone in distress and he agreed to check on Tony. Quick, Aunt May said. Not fast enough, Rhodes sighed. Then how? Bruce asked. Just watch, Tony said. Pepper, Coulson and some other agents drove away to arrest Obadiah as Rhodes swerved and drove off towards Tony's house. Tony managed to fling himself into the elevator and reached up, crawling out. What the hell? Scott bellowed. I don't believe it, Hope said, impressed by Tony's willpower. Son of a gun, Steve muttered. Where are you even going? Fury muttered. Tony managed to push open the door of his garage and crawled towards the desk where the old arc reactor was put as a gift from Pepper. You're an angel, good woman, Aunt May told Pepper, who was gripping Tony's hand so tightly both of their knuckles were white. So this is how you did it, Hill said and Tony nodded. Tony pulled himself up on a plastic bin and stretched up his arm, before falling back down on the floor. Oh no, Bucky of all people muttered. That was when a peculiar whine was heard and a robotic arm came down with the arc reactor in its claw. It was Dummy. Tony reached up for the case, looking at Dummy, which gave a concerned click. Good boy, Tony said to it and shattered the case against the floor. Good boy, Tony said. The best boy, Pepper said. Dummy, Vision cried. I knew it was good for something, Bruce said. And that something was this, Professor Hulk said. Phew, Peter sighed in relief. I think you have 9 lives, Mr. Stark, Benjamin told him. A very good observation, Mr. Parker, T'Challa agreed. Obadiah stood in front of the ironmonger suit, arc reactor in hand. With a smirk, he put the arc reactor on its center. That looks like a lot of suit, Scott said. It is a lot of suit, Tony said. Rhodes burst into Tony's lounge, calling out for him. He found Tony in his workshop, doubled over the shattered glass. He ran up to him and turned him around, revealing that the arc reactor was inside him now. He inquired about Tony's well-being. Tony simply inquired about Pepper and Rhodes said that her and 5 other agents were about to arrest Obadiah. Tony said that it was not going to be enough as he got up. He's fine. He's asking about Pepper, Natasha said and the two blushed. Yup. Rhodes said. This is not going to be pretty, Sam said. Pepper, Coulson and the other agents arrived outside the Stark Industries factory and she led them inside, around the arc reactor, until they found Section 16. She tried to use her keycard to open the door but it didn't budge, so an agent handed Coulson a device which he placed on the lock. They all took a few steps back with Pepper covering her ears as it exploded. Inside, Obadiah heard the explosion and rushed towards his suit. This is not going to end well for the agents, Hill sighed. If only they knew that Crazy Town was back and was about to get even crazier, Fury said. It didn't really pick the lock, Pepper said with dry humor. Nah. This was even better, Tony said. Tony put on his suit in his workshop in front of an odd roadie who said it was the coolest thing ever. Tony aimed a ray at the car he had crushed after falling from his first flight and sent it flying away from him. It works, Bruce said happily. Tony's mask went down as he told Rhodes to keep the skies clear and flew off the ceiling into the night sky. Rhodes stared after him in awe and looked at the unpainted but still impressive-looking Mark II armor. Next time, baby, he said as he sat in one of Tony's cars and sped away. Next time, Rhodes said as him and Tony high-fived. Phil Coulson entered Sector 16 with Pepper and the other agents behind. The agents had their guns out. They came across the reconstituted Mark I armor. Pepper thought it would have been bigger. A lot bigger, Pepper said. Pepper heard a buzzing noise from behind her and looked to see 2 disconnected cables that were still buzzing. Peter started. How big? Enormous. You will see it soon, Tony said. The agents split up. Coulson and another agent went together while the other 3 found some upgrades to the Mark I armor. Pepper heard a slight noise behind her but couldn't see much due to the darkness, so she stepped further to look closely, only for 2 eyes to shine in the darkness. Oh shit, Scott said. And it's on, Hope said. You should have stayed with the agents, Miss Potts, T'Challa said in distress. Something colossal stood up and looked down on Pepper as she ran off in fright, alerting Coulson and the agents. They tried to fire, but the ironmonger suit knocked them all out and tried to grab Pepper, barely missing her. Steve snarled, "Don't you dare!" Tony flew through the sky, with Jarvis telling him the suit was at 48% power and falling as the chest piece wasn't designed for sustained flight. As Pepper ran out of the Stark Industries factory, Tony called out to her on her cell phone. After inquiring about his well-being, she tried to tell him about Stain, to which he replied he already knew. He asked Pepper to get out of the place. The pavement behind Pepper suddenly moved and cracked until it broke as the ironmonger rose and towered over her. "Get the hell away from her," Bucky of all people bellowed, making Tony and Pepper look at him in surprise, with Steve and Natasha nodding at him in pride. "I hope he is burning in hell for all his crimes," Thor snarled. Obadiah taunted Pepper as she backed off in fear with a scream. "Your services are no longer required," he said coldly, and a barrel of enormous rounds on his arm began to spin. "No!" Wanda cried out. "Stain!" The two looked up as the Iron Man Mark III armor sailed directly into the ironmonger, knocking it backwards out of the Stark Industries grounds onto the busy roads outside. "Yes, Peter," Thor and Bruce cheered happily. "About damn time," Fury said. "Thank God." Steve sighed. Tony sailed into the side of a truck as Obadiah landed in the middle of an intersection. Cars swerved to avoid him, but he grabbed a car and threw it over his shoulder. One minivan with a woman and her children halted right in front of Obadiah, and he lifted them up, making them scream in terror. Tony demanded him to put them down, but he coldly refused. "Son of a bitch," Scott snarled. "What did they ever do to you?" Clint snarled, reminded of Laura and his children. "Nothing. He is just an asshole," Logan snarled with rage. "And a coward," Steve spat. "And a greedy warmonger," Natasha said. "More like ironmonger," Peter said. Tony told Jarvis to divert chest power to RT, and soon, a beam was fired out of the arc reactor, sending Stain flying back as the car fell, but Tony caught it and fell to one knee while the power dropped to 19%. The woman slammed on the gas pedal and the minivan came down with a thud, running into Tony, who slid to the ground and lifted the back wheels over him to avoid getting crushed before letting it go and rolling away. The minivan safely sped away. "That wasn't fun," Sam said. "Not fun at all," Tony sighed. As Tony got up, Obadiah leapt near him and grabbed a motorcycle, sending the rider tumbling down, before slamming it into Tony, sending him flying off. A nearby bus had stopped and passengers were running out. Obadiah slammed Tony into that bus and lifted him up before throwing him down again and slamming him with his foot, saying how he had lifted him up for 30 years and had built the company from nothing. "No you haven't," Tony said. "You and Howard Stark built it from nothing," Fury corrected him coldly. He hurled Tony into the now empty bus through the side, saying how nothing was going to stand in his way now, least of all Stark. A large projectile opened on his shoulder and he fired it into the now ruined bus. The resulting explosion sent Tony flying into the air, and he came down just as his flight repulsors started working, helping him hover upright for a moment. "Phew," Pepper sighed in relief. "That was close," Rhodes said. "It is about to get worse," Tony said. Obadiah was impressed by the upgrades and said he had some of his own. The ironmonger suit lifted itself off the ground and ascended into the air. Jarvis noted the suit could fly. "You're stating the obvious now," Wanda told him. "I was designed that way," Vision said. Tony wanted to fly up to maximum altitude in spite of only 15% power, and Jarvis obeyed as he soared into the clouds, ironmonger following. Pepper watched worriedly from the ground. In the military surveillance area, the privates noted the return of the thing from Gulmira and were about to get Major Allen when Rhodey stopped them, saying it was just a training exercise, to which the young man agreed hesitantly. "Now the military is interfering again," Hope sighed. "Just like always," Pepper said. "Good ol' Rhodey," Tony said with a smirk. "I have my moments," Rhodes said with his own smirk. Tony soared into the sky, noting the decrease in power as Obadiah flew after him. "There is ice on him," T'Challa noted, and everyone nodded, realizing Tony's plan. Obadiah grabbed Tony and gloated that while his idea was great, the ironmonger suit was more advanced in every way. Tony inquired about the icing problem, confusing Obadiah as the lights in the helmet flickered and then went out. Tony hit the helmet, sending Obadiah down as his own suit went out of power but managed to run on emergency backup power. "Yes," Peter cheered. "That's the end of him," Bruce said. "Hope he burns in hell," Thor said. "Actually, it's not," Tony revealed to their shock. "What do you mean?" Scott asked. "It looks pretty final." "Just watch," Pepper said. Tony fell on top of the factory on his knees and called out to Pepper, who asked if he was okay. Tony said he was almost out of power as he ripped out a glove in his helmet. That moment, he heard a clanking thud behind him and turned around to see Ironmonger looming over him. Obadiah taunted his efforts and tried to punch. Tony ducked, but when he tried to fire, he realized he had ripped off that glove and received a punch to the face that sent him flying off. "What did I tell ya?" Tony said. "Is there any end to him?" Scott asked angrily. "I can't stand him for one more minute," Hope said as he reminded her too much of Darren Cross. "Don't worry, you only have to stand him for about 5, Pepper said. "I can live with that," Hope said. Tony recovered and leaping up, punched Obadiah on the helmet but got caught in a bear hug. Jarvis told him repulsors and missiles were offline, so he deployed flares, temporarily blinding Obadiah, who let him go. "It worked," Rhodes said. "Kinda," Tony agreed. As Obadiah recovered, Tony peered at him from a corner and called out to Pepper, telling her to overload the reactor and blast the roof. Pepper asked him how to do that and he explained how to. Pepper agreed and went in as Tony told her to wait until he was clear of the roof and he would buy her some time. Tony ducked out of the way as Obadiah arrived and Pepper pulled down all the switches. "Oh boy," Sam said. "This is just so intense," Peter said. "Totally in agreement with you, kid," Scott said. Tony jumped on Stain's back and Jarvis located a weak point which he ripped out triumphantly, making Obadiah lose the optical connection. Pepper pushed a row of square glowing buttons as Stain grabbed Tony and threw him onto the glass pane's eye above the large arc reactor. Pepper twisted a row of dials as the chest pieces of the Ironmonger folded back and the helmet opened up to reveal Obadiah Stain inside. "There you are, you rascal," Thor said. "Come on, Pepper," Aunt May muttered. Obadiah held out the helmet of the Mark III armor and said he was deeply enjoying the suit before crumpling it into a twisted lump of metal and throwing it next to Tony. Obadiah gloated that Tony had outdone himself and made his father proud. Pepper pushed the last buttons and opened the cover of a large red one. She asked Tony to get off the roof as Obadiah shot at the glass around Tony. He tried to defend himself but the glass was shattered and he clung to the metal bars as Pepper screamed and raised her hands to protect herself from the glass. "Were you okay down there?" Tony asked. "Were you okay up there?" Pepper asked incredulously. Obadiah fired again, shattering more glass on the unfortunate Pepper, who looked up to see Tony dangling and called out to him. Obadiah fired some missiles which missed and exploded behind Tony as he said how Tony had ripped out his targeting system as the man asked Pepper to push the button in spite of him being there. "Just do it," Tony shouted. "You'll die," Pepper howled as another explosion caused Tony to lose his hold and he had to hold with his bare hand. "Push it," he shouted. Pepper punched the button and raced away from the station as the reactor came to life and filled the room with charges that could have individually powered a house each. Then it sent a blast of power up to the roof which blasted Tony aside and struck the Ironmonger's smaller reactor. "Whoa!" Sam shouted. "That was awesome," Peter cheered and saw everyone looking at him incredulously, "and very dangerous." "Nice save," Benjamin said as everyone laughed. Obadiah gave a cry as the resulting shock sent a bolt of electricity into the sky, causing a streak of lightning and a clap of thunder. He was dead before the suit even began to fall, clanking its way down through the factory into the great arc reactor. There was a burst of flame that nearly caught Tony as he rolled away from the hole in the roof. Then, slowly, the air cleared. Tony lay unmoving, the arc reactor flickering feebly. "Tony," came the voice of Pepper. The arc reactor went out, and the screen went dark. "That will do it," Sam said. "You killed him with lightning. I like that," Thor smirked. "Of course you do," Loki said dryly. "I still do," Odinson told him and he sighed. "What about the two of you?" Steve asked Tony and Pepper. "Let's watch," Tony said. "Yeah, let's," Pepper agreed. "You two have very stressful lives." Rhodes told them, and that in turn, makes my life very stressful. That was a good observation, Colonel, Vision noted. Now we will see the fallout of this, won't we, Mr. Parker? T'Challa asked, and Benjamin nodded. The next day, on a TV screen, a press conference was being streamed live. Rhodes stood at the podium, telling the official cover story. Tony sat on his couch, reading the Chronicle, and being attended to by Pepper as the headline ran, "Who is the Iron Man?" There was a picture of the Mark III armor which someone had managed to take. "Now we know where the name came from," Thor said. "It was a cool name," Peter said. "That is a good picture," Natasha said. "Wonder who took it," Clint said. Tony commented how the Iron Man name was catchy with a nice ring to it, but said it wasn't accurate as the suit was a titanium gold alloy, while Pepper pulled a bandage off his nose. He agreed that it was evocative at least. Phil Coulson handed him some blue cards and said they were his alibi. "There is Coulson," Steve said. "Ready to save the day," Tony said. "I think we all know how the alibi turned out," Xavier said with a smile as everyone chuckled. Tony argued a bit about the alibi, but Coulson said, "This isn't my first rodeo, Mr. Stark. Just stick to the official statement and soon this will all be behind you." "I still remember that first rodeo," Fury muttered to himself. Pepper thanked Coulson for all his help and he said that's what they did and that the two would hear from him. Pepper was about to pronounce the entire name of the organization when Coulson told her to call them S.H.I.E.L.D. and walked away. Pepper helped Tony dress up as he commented the alibi was good enough. Tony said if he was Iron Man, he would have a girlfriend who knew his secret identity and would worry over him but would be proud of the man he had become. "Ah," Natasha said. "I think I'm kind of like that," Peter said, "only except girlfriend, it's my aunt." "Right you are, Peter," Aunt May said with a proud smile. Tony reminded Pepper of the night they had and she reminded him that he had left her, making him deflate. "Crap," Rhodes said, "and I thought we were having a moment," Tony said as Pepper smirked. "Will that be all, Mr. Stark?" Pepper asked. "That will be all, Miss Potts," Tony said at the same moment, and he left in rather a hurry. "Snap," Scott said. Rhodes told the reporters Stark had prepared a statement and stood aside as Tony arrived and said he would just stick to the cards this time, and the press chuckled. "So much for that." Natasha rolled her eyes. "Should have done that," Fury said as Stark looked over at him. "Would have saved everyone a headache." Everyone laughed. Tony talked about the speculation of his involvement in the freeway and on the rooftop when Christine Everhart interrupted him and asked if he expected them to believe the story of a bodyguard in a suit that conveniently appeared. "And Christine is back with a vengeance," Scott sighed. "I knew the excuse wouldn't work," Tony said. Tony said it was one thing to question the official story and another to insinuate that he was a superhero, to which she replied that she didn't. Tony started backtracking when Rhodes told him to stick to the cards and he agreed. "Here it comes," Natasha said. "Watch out," Clint said. "Truth is." Tony looked up and his face went completely blank. Everyone held their breaths in anticipation. "I am Iron Man." "Ta-da," Aunt May said. Loki started laughing merrily as everyone else except Clint and Fury clapped at Tony, who almost felt like getting up and bowing down to acknowledge their respect for him. Instantly the press conference room was in uproar and every reporter sprang to his or her feet. All except, of course, for Christine Everhart. Tony almost smiled for a moment, and then the screen went dark. "She's not even standing," Scott said. "To be honest, she doesn't have any obligation to," Hope pointed out. "That's the end of it," Tony said. "Not quite," Benjamin said. "Really?" Tony asked. "What's left?" "Just watch," Professor Hulk said as the screen lit up again. Tony entered his lounge as he called out to Jarvis, who responded in a distorted voice. "What's wrong with you?" Wanda asked. "Just watch," Vision said. "So we're watching this," Tony said as him and Fury exchanged a knowing look and everyone realized something was up. Tony walked forward a step or two and halted. Behind the couch, in the shadows of the room, stood a tall figure wrapped in something dark. "I'm Iron Man," said the familiar voice. "You think you're the only superhero in the world?" "Not for long," Tony said as him and Bruce exchanged a look. "Oh," Clint said. "It's Fury," Hill said cheerfully. "About damn time," Fury said. The shadowed form of the stranger turned to the large window. "Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe," You just don't know it yet, he said. Who the hell are you? Tony asked. The stranger came forward into the lamplight, which gleamed on a long black trench coat and a black eye patch. Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he said. That's an awesome entrance. Hill cheered as everyone smiled at what they were witnessing. Nick Fury then said, I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative. The screen went black. All right. Sam cheered. So that's when it began, Steve noted. Yup. Fury said. And finally, Tony said. You did later, Natasha told him. Now that's the end of this recording, Benjamin told them. How many more are there? Pepper asked. 21, he said to their shock. 21? Clint asked. How are we going to view them all? We did tell you we will drop you off to the exact time from where we picked you up. Professor Hulk reminded, and they all relaxed. You all must be hungry. Everyone realized they were. Well, the dining room is nearby. Follow me, Benjamin said as he, Odinson, Professor Hulk and Logan got up while Xavier moved his wheelchair and the others moved to follow them. Everyone sat in the dining hall as some workers brought food for them. The people from the past noticed 5 more individuals sitting around the table. A blind man, a blonde good-looking woman, a dark-skinned woman with white hair, a tall red-haired woman, and another tall man with some special kind of glasses. One of them, the blonde good-looking woman that is, was of course recognized due to her popularity in the past. Trish Walker? Tony questioned as Trish looked at him and nodded. Mr. Stark, she said. Trish Walker? Peter asked excitedly, as in the one from Trish Talk? Yes, I am that Trish Walker, Trish said as they all started eating. Trish got superpowers, Benjamin said, so now she is a member of the Avengers. But how? Pepper asked. A few months ago from our time, we heard you were arrested. Trish winced at the reminder of her imprisonment and the actions that had led to that. We would like to not bring that up. The man next to her, whom everyone noticed was blind, spoke up. Who are you? Steve asked. My name is Matthew Murdoch, but everyone calls me Matt, the man said. Matthew Murdoch? Tony wondered before recognizing him. You're the lawyer that defended the Punisher? Ah, so you remember me, Matt said as he took a bite of his bread. What is a lawyer doing in the Avengers Tower? Bruce asked as he ate his salad. Well, you see, all the superheroes are my clients these days, Matt said, me and my partner, Franklin Nelson. You might remember him from the news. The Avengers. The X-Men. The Fantastic Four. I represent all of them legally. Wow, an impressed Scott said, what is it about you? He is Daredevil, Fury said, and everyone looked between him and Matt in shock. Wait, what? Tony asked in shock, summing up everyone's thoughts. How can you be Daredevil when you're blind? I had an accident when I was a kid, Matt said. I pushed an old man out of the way of a truck, but the radioactive elements inside it hit my face, making me blind. But they managed to enhance my other senses to a superhuman level. I can hear, smell, taste and feel better. They help me form a picture of the world around me. Wow, in awed Peter said. I have heard so much about your awesomeness as Daredevil. It is an honor to meet you. Thank you, Matt said with a flattered smile. And how do you know that he is Daredevil? Sam asked Fury. I used to be director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Fury simply said, and it did explain a lot. That was when Logan walked inside. He had departed the group to smoke for a bit. The dark-skinned woman got up and walked up to him. The two shared a quick kiss. How's it going, honey? She asked Logan. Pretty well so far, Logan said. Who are you? Clint asked politely. My name is Aurora Munro, the woman said. She is a member of the X-Men, Charles said. What are these X-Men exactly? Natasha asked. We are mutants. The man with the special glasses said. We have a special X gene in our body that causes mutation. It normally manifests during puberty, the red-haired woman said. As if puberty wasn't hard enough already, Hope muttered, making Scott snicker. So a superhero team of mutants, Hill said. That's interesting. Oh, by the way, I am Scott Summers, the man with the special glasses said. I am Jean Grey, the red-haired woman said. So what is it exactly you want us to do? Tony asked them. Why did you bring us here? To be honest, we're against the idea, Summers said as he gestured to himself and Jean. Why's that? Steve asked. Because it messes with the natural laws. Jean said, "We're basically playing God." Charles tried to say, "Jean, Professor, this is not right." Jean said, "What if we make things even worse?" "We have to try, Jean." Logan told her. "If we do this, we're no different from Kong," Summer said. "We won't be doing this if Kong didn't make a mess in the first place," Aurora said. "Sometimes, to do things right, you got to get your hands dirty, bub," Logan told Summers, who sighed. "I am sorry, who's Kong?" Tony asked. "Kong the Conqueror," Benjamin said, "a time traveler from the future who is making a mess of the timeline along with several other supervillains." "What's his story?" Bucky asked. "He is from the 31st century. Professor Hulk said, he was fascinated by time travel technology, so he used it to travel to ancient Egypt, where he turned himself into the pharaoh Rama-Tut. He wanted to claim an ancient mutant as his heir. But the Fantastic Four got time displaced and found out about it, so they defeated him and sent him off to his own timeline," Charles said. "That embittered him," Summers told everyone, "so he traveled to the present and met Dr. Victor Von Doom." Jean said. "Who is that?" Rhodes asked. "The ruler of Latveria," Aurora said. "He will become ruler of Latveria 3 years from your time," Odinson said. "I think I have heard about him somewhere," Tony said. "You would have," Matt said. "Remember something in the news about a student from the Empire State University who got expelled after trying to create some kind of machine that exploded, damaging his face and part of the university?" "All right," Pepper said as her and Tony both remembered. "So that man is going to become the ruler of Latveria," Vision noted. "And what is wrong with that?" Wanda asked. "You've met Reed Richards, right?" Benjamin asked, and they nodded. He was Victor's roommate. Everyone's eyes widened in shock on hearing that. Victor despised him right from the start because of his own arrogant personality, Trish said. He tried to warn him about the dangers of his machine, but Victor didn't listen. And yet, he blamed Reed for his accident, like a hypocrite, Matt said. So now he terrorizes the Fantastic Four, and by association, the Avengers and X-Men. "That's just wow," Hill said. "Even I don't know what to say about that," Fury said. "But the people of Latveria love him," Benjamin said, "because he is benevolent to them." "So this person is a good ruler, but a bad person overall," T'Challa noted. "Back to the story, Doom and Kong together tried to beat us, but we beat them and sent Kong to his own timeline," Summers said. "Unfortunately, he was sent thousands of years into the future from his own time," Jean said. "During that time period, the Earth was war-torn and the people used advanced weapons they knew nothing about," Logan said. "Kong found it easy to conquer them," Aurora said. "But because the future world was dying, he keeps coming back to try and conquer this world," Benjamin said. "Oh God," Aunt May said. "Looks like the people at Earth are trying to gain more power," Thor simply said. "And trying to use it in ambitious ways too," Loki noted. "Looks like I was wrong about humans." "And what does that have to do with us?" Steve asked. "Let's just say, because of you all not trusting each other, the future became a dark place," Benjamin said. "And we feel the catastrophe could be prevented if things were different," Charles told them. "That could have been done if you all had just signed," Tony said as he turned to Steve. Steve started. "Tony, Cap, I told you it was the only way to keep the Avengers together," Tony said desperately. "It wasn't," Matt said as everyone turned to him. "I'm a lawyer, so trust me when I tell you. The Accords are a flawed document that violate basic human rights of people just because they've superpowers." "I've just noticed," Bruce said. "What's going on here? You seem to be pissed at Cap and the others, Tony." "Yes. What is it, my friends?" Thor asked. "Almost a year after you left, Thor," Steve started, "there was a mission in Lagos. But a bomb went off unfortunately and people lost their lives." Wanda looked down, feeling shame as Vision put a hand on her shoulder to offer comfort. "So the governments of the world decided they should put us all under the oversight of a UN panel," Tony said. "The document was called the Sokovia Accords," Natasha said. "We were supposed to sign and act within the boundary," Rhodes said. "Or they would make us retire," Vision said. "Unfortunately, a UN meeting in Vienna to ratify the accords got bombed and everyone thought it was Bucky," Steve said as Bucky sighed. "But Cap and I found out it wasn't and someone else was behind this, so we assembled a team to try and stop that man as we thought he planned to unleash 5 other Winter Soldiers upon the world," Sam said. "That's when I was approached," Scott said excitedly with a smirk, only to see hope glaring at him. But Tony and the ones who had signed were ordered to capture them. T'Challa said, "My father was killed in the bombing, so I wanted revenge, which is why I joined too. And that's when I was approached." Peter said excitedly with a smirk, only to see Aunt May glaring at both him and Tony. "I still can't believe you brought a kid to the fight," Steve said as he shook his head. "I was desperate at the moment," Tony said, "and I did order him to keep his distance." "He should never have been brought there in the first place," Sam said. "He's a kid, and even if you thought there wasn't going to be a fight, there was a chance a fight would happen. While I accept you and my nephew working together, Mr. Stark, I have still not forgiven you for taking him to Germany without telling me the truth," Aunt May said with a glare. "To be honest, that was pretty irresponsible of you," Pepper told Tony, who sighed. "So wait, this man made you all fight amongst yourselves? Oh, I like this man," Loki said, only for Thor to smack him hard on the head, making him yell, "Ouch. Brother, you have redeemed yourself, but I do not think this is the time to make jokes," Thor said. "In the fight, everyone except Steve and Bucky were captured," Natasha said. "We went to Siberia, where he was," Steve said. "That's when I found out the truth," Tony said, "and I followed them." "I followed them too for revenge," T'Challa said. "And they're the man, whose name was Zemo, revealed something to us," Steve said with a sad sigh as Bucky looked away in shame and Natasha put a hand on his shoulder comfortingly. "What?" Bruce asked. "That Barnes was responsible for killing my parents and Rogers knew," Tony snarled angrily. "What?" Thor asked in shock. "Because of that, the three of us had a fight and we departed on bad terms," Steve said sadly. "I heard Zemo confessing and arrested him on the spot, before offering asylum to Captain Rogers and Mr. Barnes in Wakanda. I also helped Mr. Stark out of Siberia," T'Challa said. "Oh my God," Bruce said in horror. "I go away for 1 year and you all find yourself in petty squabbles." Thor sighed, "I can't believe it." "Why didn't you tell me, Cap?" Tony asked angrily. "Because I didn't know it was him," Steve said. "Bullshit," Tony exploded. "I knew it was Hydra," Steve revealed. "Back when Hydra had taken over S.H.I.E.L.D., me and Natasha met an artificial version of Arnim Zola, a Hydra scientist who worked for the Red Skull. He said Hydra had caused many deaths in the world, and when he said that, he showed us a newspaper clipping of your parents' death," Natasha said. "So you knew too?" Tony asked angrily. "Only that it was Hydra," Natasha said. "I suspected it was Bucky," Steve said, "but until Zemo showed the video, I didn't know for sure it was him." "Why didn't you say anything?" Tony asked. "I thought I was protecting you, but in truth, I was protecting myself. I made a subconscious decision to not look into the matter at all," Steve said with a guilty sigh. "I'm sorry, Tony. I should have shared my suspicions with you a long time ago. You deserved to know." Tony simply nodded, still bitter but a bit more understanding now. "But like I have said already, the Accords were a flawed document," Matt said as everyone turned to him. "Mr. Stark, I know you're a good person, but during that time you were consumed by guilt, and because of that, you couldn't see the flaws in them." "Like what?" Pepper asked. "People who have signed and have superpowers have to wear a tracking bracelet at all times," Matt said. "It's a violation of their privacy." "There is a tracker in me," Vision revealed. "Which you had shut off," Tony said. "Not everyone can," Vision said. "And enhanced are thrown into the raft with no trial," Matt said as Trish sighed and nodded. "Back where you're from, I committed a lot of crimes for which I am trying to atone now," Trish said with some shame in her eyes, "but back then, they threw me into the raft without giving me a trial. I thought I would spend all of my life there. But 5 years from your time, the Accords were overturned and all the prisoners of the raft were released and given a fair trial. I ended up getting 7 years of jail time after I cut a deal. After my sentence was finished, I was released, and since then, I have been trying to use my power for good." "We were thrown into the raft without a trial," Sam noted. "I was trying to get the Accords amended," Tony said in his defense. "How exactly would you do that, Mr. Stark?" Matt asked. "Withhold your latest technology phone from the countries that refuse to amend the Accords? Because you do not have any power to amend them." Tony sighed, realizing the ridiculousness of his own idea. The Accords were a flawed document, but at the time, people supported them because of Sokovia and Lagos, Summers said. Only later did they realize they were wrong. Jean said. How? Steve asked. We will tell you later, Benjamin said, not wanting to talk about it right now. Captain Rogers. Mr. Stark. Both of you made mistakes. Xavier told them kindly, but both of you need to trust each other again sometime. And that is why we have brought you here, to help you see your errors. Steve and Tony looked at Xavier and nodded simply. And let's not forget, the accords were brought to you 3 days before they were ratified. Fishy much? Logan pointed out. Very fishy. Aurora said. They had been planned for a while. Natasha realized, yet they didn't consult the group of people they were making the laws about. And you do not know what Ross is capable of, do you? Professor Hulk asked and Bruce tensed. Ross? Bruce asked in shock, as in General Ross? Professor Hulk nodded at him. He was the general trying to capture you, wasn't he? Tony asked as he saw Bruce pale. I never told you about what he was, did I? Bruce asked. What? Tony asked. He wasn't trying to capture Dr. Banner for the government, Fury said, but to save his own ass. Okay, what? Tony asked in shock. I didn't talk about the incidents too much because I didn't want to relive it, Bruce said, but I can tell you no. There is no need, Benjamin said as everyone turned to him, because the next recording we will watch is about you, Dr. Banner. During the time you were on the run. After a deep breath, Bruce said, all right. So Ross was involved in deep shit? Tony asked and Benjamin, Professor Hulk and Bruce nodded. And you outed my family to him, Clint snarled. About that, Barton. No, I am not forgiving you for that, Clint said. I gave you a place to lay low. And this is how you repay me? By outing my family to Ross? Now I am on house arrest and Ross can use them any time to threaten me. Tony looked down in shame, realizing he had put his friend's family in danger due to his ego. Well, food is finished, Logan said to defuse the situation, so let's go. I still don't approve of this, but if you feel it is right, do it, Summer said. Yup. I agreed too, Jean said as her, Scott and Aurora walked away, the latter sharing another quick kiss with Logan. Matt and Trish got up and walked away too. Let's see what went down between you and this Ross, Thor told Banner who nodded. With that, everyone made their way to the viewing room again. After lunch, everyone returned to the viewing room and took the same couches as before in the same positions. So it's me we're watching this time? Bruce asked again. Yes, my friend, Odinson said. Well, Banner, it's your time to shine now. Thor clapped Banner on the back. Good thing, Rhodes said. Yeah, I think watching too much of you, Mr. Stark, might make them sick, Benjamin said as everyone chuckled and Tony had a look of mock offense. I will try not to take that personally, Tony said sarcastically. Bruce is your science bro though, right? Pepper asked. Right, Tony said as he looked at Bruce, it's gonna be awesome to see you on there. Bruce just nodded politely. Now you will see why poking him is not the best idea, Loki told Tony who simply sighed and looked away. So Ross is this too? Steve asked and Logan nodded. Yeah, and he's as bad as William Stryker, Logan said. Who's William Stryker? Bucky asked. I think I've heard of him, Natasha said. An old military scientist, Fury said. I heard he did some deep shit. Yes. Something about mutations, Hill said too. I'll tell you about him later, Logan said with a sigh. So let's get started, Xavier said. Yup. With pleasure, Professor Hulk said as he started the recording and everyone started watching. Someone pushed a switch. There was another brain scan, and in a chair attached to a large machine sat a man, who was Bruce Banner himself. Everything was coming and going in flashes. So we're watching this, Bruce said. Your origin story? Peter asked and Bruce simply nodded. Your hair's short in this, Scott said randomly. Actually, I think you look very different in this, Hope said. Yeah, Clint said, you look very different now. What happened to you? Tony asked. In this recording, you look like you could be a member of a fight club or something. I have no idea how my appearance changed so much over the years, Bruce simply said. At least he doesn't look like that Hector guy from the Troy movie Jane showed me when we were together, Thor said offhandedly. 2. A woman in a white lab coat stood watching behind a glass panel. Betty, Bruce whispered as he remembered her. Thor put a hand on his shoulder in support and he nodded in appreciation. From the chair, Bruce gave Betty a wink. The chair tilted into position for the procedure. Someone pushed a button. A green light shone into Bruce's eyes. Betty pushed another switch and a button. A red, danger, sign began to glow. The green light grew brighter. The irises of Bruce's eyes glowed green. Betty stared through the glass, clearly worried. "Oh," Tony said. "This doesn't look good," Aunt May said. "Not good at all," Sam agreed. "Here goes." Bruce sighed as he almost didn't look. "I still remember that day like yesterday," Professor Hulk sighed. There was a roar. The white shirt Bruce had been wearing ripped. A mass of green rose from it. The chair was knocked on its side, steaming and smoking. Behind the glass, Betty ran forward, staring in horror. A huge green hand appeared in the corner, reaching for some part of the machine that dangled from the ceiling. Bruce cringed and looked away again. "Oh God," Sam said. Bruce turned to see Natasha looking at him. "It wasn't your fault," she told him. While she had moved on from him and loved Bucky, with whom she was happy, she still cared for Bruce as a friend. He simply nodded as Thor put a hand on his shoulder again. "I know that now," Professor Hulk said. Through the eyes of the newly released Hulk, they saw dimly the form of the man who was none other than General Ross, as he had then been. There was blood on his face, and he seemed to be utterly horrified. Wanda gulped in fear on seeing him as Vision put an arm around her again. "Ross," Clint growled darkly, thinking of ways to kill him. "So he was involved in this accident," Steve muttered. "Worse," Banner said. "He is definitely covering something up," Tony said. "To save his own ass," Fury told everyone. "I call him General Jackass," Logan said, and everyone laughed. And then they saw Betty lying on the floor among the wreckage of the machines, unconscious, bruised and battered. The shadow of the Hulk loomed over her, and a great green hand reached down toward her. "Oh God," Aunt May said in horror. Bruce turned away from the screen in shame as Thor said, "It wasn't your fault, Bruce." "I know it wasn't, but I still feel some guilt for it," Professor Hulk said. But then there were flashes of a gun, of a military man standing by Ross and shooting. The Hulk seemed to roar, and he reached for Ross and shoved him aside before tossing the man with the gun out through the door of the lab. Ross, bleeding and obviously badly wounded, crawled across the floor and flung himself on top of Betty. His hand was outstretched and his mouth open in a silent scream of no. The room seemed to spin, and then another image of a scan appeared. Then the door of a hospital room slid open, and there lay Betty, still unconscious and looking terribly battered. "No," Bruce groaned as he put his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," Thor said to him to offer sympathy. Bruce's hand tenderly caressed the woman's face. Then came a glimpse like another memory of Betty with a radiant smile and bare shoulders lying under a sheet. Then Bruce was sitting by Betty's bedside, and now a hand clamped down on his arm. A thunderous-looking Ross loomed over him, and shoved him roughly from the room. "The whole thing was your fault and you blamed me like a cowardly hypocrite," Professor Hulk snarled. "He cared more about himself than anyone else," Bruce said. "If I knew what he had done, I would never have listened to his proposition of the Accords at all," Steve said. "That thing was shady anyway," Scott said. "Agreed," Hope said too. "Now I feel like idiot number one for signing them," Tony said to himself. "It's okay. We all make mistakes," Pepper told him comfortingly. "That man is not coming after my boy, is he?" Aunt May asked Peter. "No, I made sure of that," Tony said, and she relaxed. "Thank you," she said to him. "Thank you, Mr. Stark," Peter said too. "General Jackass, always saving his own ass," Logan said, and everyone laughed. Betty's eyes opened, but Bruce was already gone and her father was staring stonily through the glass at her. At the door of the facility, Bruce turned briefly to see Ross speaking to a private, then he turned back around and pushed out of the building. Newspaper headlines about first sightings of the Hulk flashed by. Then an image of a house in ruins. Then a crushed car. Military men stormed into another house, armed to the teeth, but seeming to find only traces of their quarry: books, papers, test tubes. "You were good," Hill noted. "But I still won't be a SHIELD agent," Bruce said, and everyone chuckled. Ross stood in front of a table, peering intently at some report. A set of blinds in an upper-story window twitched as someone looked out of them down at two armed soldiers outside. Two helicopters whizzed through the air. Shadowy forms of more soldiers moved through a back street. Once again they were met with defeat. An empty cot and a pile of dishes greeted them. Ross spun in a chair, cigar smoke surrounding his head. Another newspaper headlines flashed past, followed by images from helicopter windows and another image of Ross. He seemed to be monitoring yet another pursuit. "What does he want you for?" Scott asked. "Don't ask," Bruce and Professor Hulk said at the same time. "It must be something horrible," T'Challa said. "I can always find records of that if I want," Vision said. "I hope you do," Wanda said as she glared at Ross in hatred. A page showing a requisition request, U.S. Army Stark Industries, approved notice appeared, followed by plans for some rather awful-looking device. Ross puffed at his cigar again while looking through a number of fingerprint scans. A plane touched down at a military base. An intercepted email from Bruce to Betty flashed across the screen. Bruce looked as Xavier told him, "Calm down, Dr. Banner." Bruce calmed down and sighed. Meditation helps. There came the briefest glimpse of the name Nick Fury, followed by a few images of Bruce. Ross seemed to have lost track of him. And then remembered images went by in flashes. Then a truck went up a snowy hill in Alaska, with Bruce Banner sitting in it. The driver dropped him off and he continued to climb and trek his way. "So this was flashbacks?" Peter asked. "Appears so," Bruce said. "It was intense," Aunt May said. "We made this recording in such a way so as to not show all of that. It might cause the other guy to come out." Professor Hulk said, "Of course I don't have that issue." Bruce nodded at that. Eventually, Bruce stopped and stood in the middle of the snow. He took off his glasses and cap and looked at the sky, which looked a little greenish. An image of a battered and bleeding Betty in the lab flashed in his head and he closed his eyes sadly. Bruce and Professor Hulk both cringed on seeing Betty and remembered what they were about to do in that moment. The flame of decision forming in his eyes, Bruce took out a gun and holding it out, turned off the safety. "What?" Peter said in horror, not expecting this. "Even I had a hard time remembering I almost did that," Bruce said. 3. "Oh my God," Aunt May said as she covered her mouth. "I'm sorry, Bruce," Steve told him sadly and he nodded. "We are here for you, Banner," Thor assured. "Thanks," Bruce said. "That was one of the worst days of my life," Professor Hulk said. Before Bruce could turn the gun on himself, his eyes suddenly glowed green. The screen then changed to Bruce's point of view and through his eyes, his hands could be seen getting bigger and greener as the Hulk crushed the gun. "You put a bullet in your mouth," Tony said as he remembered what Bruce had told them all in the helicarrier. "And the other guy spit it out," Bruce finished. The enraged Hulk punched the ground and a quake was caused, followed by an avalanche that brought mountain down. "What the hell?" Natasha said in horror. "That is why I wanted everyone to stay away from me," Bruce said. "This incident was detected by satellite," Fury said. "Yeah, I remember that," Hill said too. "Oh no," Tony said too. Then, an unspecified amount of time later, metronome ticked incessantly and a hand clamped down on the metronome, and a shirtless and sweating Bruce Banner stared at it, panting. Bruce was sitting on a mat on the floor of a very bare-looking room, and had just moved the metronome from beside the mat. He pushed the ticker into place as the words, "Days without incident. 158 inches" appeared in white on the lower right corner of the screen. "Just over 5 months," Vision noted. "That was probably the best I ever reached," Bruce said. "Impressive, buddy," Tony said. "Yes. Your concentration to prevent that must have been impressive," Thor said too as Banner nodded. There was a wide shot of the crowded ramshackle buildings of a shantytown, one that spanned many steep hilltops. "The Roshina favela?" Clint asked. "Yes," Bruce nodded. "Really, nowadays I wonder why I didn't have an incident on there," Professor Hulk said. "It was one crowded place." "Yeah. Last I heard, the place had 250,000, Hill said. "That's one big slum," Steve commented. "Biggest in Brazil," Natasha said. "And I lived there." Bruce sighed. Bruce stood on a hilltop with a soda in his hand, looking out over the district. The scene changed and Bruce was cooking some meat with a wooden spoon. He paused to feed a bit of it to his black dog nearby. "You have a dog?" Peter asked. "I used to," Bruce said. "Dogs," Thor commented, "very loyal." "Yes. If they were as big and fast as horses, things would be easier," Odinson agreed. "I don't know what happened to him," Bruce sighed. "I do," Professor Hulk said sadly, and everyone realized from the tone of his voice that it was nothing good. Bruce dished out the rest of the meat on a plate, and went to turn on a little old television, picking up a worn black English-Portuguese dictionary resting on top of it. He flipped past a weather channel, a soccer game broadcast, a drama series, and paused on a Sesame Street segment. "Cookie Monster," Tony said with a smirk. "C is for cookie. That's good enough for me," Sam said in a sing-song voice, and most of the people laughed at fond memories. Bruce sat down in a chair in front of the television with his breakfast and his Portuguese dictionary. He opened the dictionary with one hand, glancing at the television as he ate. He flipped to the word he was looking for, which was hungry, and said it over a few times as he ate. The dog blinked its round brown-rimmed eyes at him, and Bruce scruffled it affectionately behind the ears. "So he knows what I'm saying," Bruce said with a smile. "Yes, he does," Professor Hulk said. Bruce walked down a staircase that sloped down the hill on which his very high apartment sat alongside a wall decorated with red tiles. Later, in a martial arts studio, the instructor flipped Bruce over his back and then practiced the move again more slowly. He told Bruce in Portuguese to work on his breathing as he finished. He sat on the floor facing Bruce, and put his hand on his chest just under his collarbone. He told Bruce to control his emotions. And Bruce puffed in and out, brow furrowed in concentration. "Did it help?" Thor asked. "Yes," Bruce said, "for a time." The instructor told Bruce to use his diaphragm and demonstrated it too. He told Bruce to control his pulse and then struck him across the face. "Bad idea," Rhodes said. "If he had known, he wouldn't have probably," Wanda said. "Yup," Bruce agreed. "Good thing I wasn't around at the moment," Loki said, and everyone glared at him, making him shut up. Bruce's head was thrown aside, and his heart monitor began beeping wildly as he was struck again. He glanced down at it in some alarm, seeing that his heart rate had climbed dangerously high. He breathed a little and it slowly started climbing down. "Phew," Peter sighed in relief. "Don't worry, it was fine," Bruce assured. "For a while," Professor Hulk said. Later, Bruce was changing in a locker room when a bald coworker bumped into him on purpose, making him almost hit the locker. Bruce glared at him and sighed, calming himself down as he took off his cap. "Bad idea," Peter told the coworker. "What's his problem?" Tony asked. "Xenophobia," Bruce said, and everyone gave a collective, "Oh." Later, Bruce was wheeling some bottles around as they moved up on a conveyor. Workers were filling up the bottles with liquids and stacking them up. Bruce stopped to give a package to a female coworker of his called Martina. As he walked off, she looked after him with a smile. "She likes what she's seeing," Tony commented, and everyone snickered. "I like what I saw too," Bruce said as everyone turned to him. "But because of everything going on, it would never have worked out," Professor Hulk said, and they all nodded. "I can understand," Steve said in sympathy as Bruce nodded. The plant manager called Bruce upstairs to fix some broken machinery and he nodded. Bruce then worked on the damaged controller of a part of the conveyor with the manager next to him and managed to make it work as the belt started again. Bruce explained the problem as the manager joked that he needed a new factory. Grateful for how much Bruce had helped him in the past few months, the manager offered to put him on payroll. Just as Bruce finished putting the machine back in place, he sliced open his finger accidentally and 2 large drops of his gamma-infested blood fell down somewhere in the bottles. "Shit," Sam cursed. "The world always makes everything tough," Scott said. "Even impossible," Hope sighed. "Yup," Bruce agreed, remembering what had happened after that. "This is going to go downhill real fast," Benjamin said to prepare everyone. Horrified, Banner ran down, demanding to stop the conveyor. The manager quickly had it shut down as Bruce looked around for his blood when he saw it had fallen between 2 of the bottles. He quickly cleaned it, making sure no stain was left, and closed up his finger with the crazy glue. He then told the manager to start it again. The manager shrugged and the conveyor was started. What nobody noticed was that the other drop of his blood had fallen at the opening of one of the bottles that was now being moved up in the conveyor. "Uh-oh," Rhodes said as everyone paled. That bottle, along with all of the others, was filled up and packed in a shipping container which was marked for the USA. "And now the time for trials has come," Xavier said. "General Jackass is coming." Logan said, and everyone snickered. Later, Bruce was walking off for lunch when he saw the bald coworker who bullied him trying to ask Martina out, though she refused. At first, he ignored, but the man touched her face and Bruce returned, marching towards him. The man and his friends turned to him as Bruce asked Martina to have lunch with him. The bald man called him gringo and told him to get lost. Bruce asked Martina to come with him again as the bald man tried to shoo him off. Bruce told him not to make him angry, but because he wasn't fluent in Portuguese, he ended up saying, "hungry," confusing everyone. Everyone laughed at that. "It's not like all of you know Portuguese," Bruce said. "Yeah, I don't think they do," Professor Hulk agreed. "Doesn't mean we can't laugh about it," Odinson said. "We have the all speak though," Thor pointed out, and both the Thors nodded. "Lucky you," Loki told him. The bald man attacked him, but he dodged. The manager arrived and broke up the fight. Bruce quickly led Martina away. "Nice save," Clint said, impressed. "That was very noble of you, Dr. Banner," T'Challa told him. "She was my friend," Bruce said simply. Later, Bruce met a man he had hired to get something for him, a special kind of flower. The man held the flower up and Bruce hugged him happily. He returned the hug. Bruce later returned home and showed the flower to his dog, telling him it was their ticket out of the place. He then plugged in his laptop and also took out a picture of Betty, staring at it. He entered an encryption into his laptop and started chatting with someone called Mr. Blue, while referring to himself as Mr. Green. Mr. Blue told him to try the flower. "Who's Mr. Blue?" Bucky asked. "You will see," Benjamin said. "I believe he is a scientist of some kind," Vision said. "Right you are, Viz," Professor Hulk told him. Bruce cut off the flower's petals and slowly synthesized its ingredients into a chemical concoction. He then cut his thumb and put the blood on a glass slide before pouring the concoction over it and placing it under a microscope. He could see his red blood cells, with greenish glowing energy over them. The greenish glow slowly faded away and he smiled happily, thinking he had found the cure. But then suddenly the greenish glow returned and the red color of the RBCs vanished, making them totally green again. Bruce shook his head, visibly deflated. "And it didn't work," Tony said. "I wanted to cure it badly back then," Bruce said. Bruce messaged Mr. Blue again, telling him he had used the entire flower and that it was a failure. Mr. Blue told Bruce to meet, but he said it wasn't safe. Mr. Blue retorted that living with gamma poisoning wasn't safe and requested a blood sample, saying he couldn't help Bruce if he didn't let him. "I know how much you wanted to help," Bruce said with a glare. "What happened?" Thor asked. "Looks like the man was a fraud," Loki said. "You will see," Professor Hulk told them. Bruce took a blood sample and labeling it Mr. Green, he packaged it, labeling it to Mr. Blue, before having it shipped off the following day. In Arlington, Virginia, Ross was signing some reports when Major Kathleen Spar handed him a file and told him that a man had drank some kind of soda in Milwaukee and it gave him gamma sickness. The scene changed as Spar's voice was heard to show an elderly man trying the soda and dropping it as the gamma blood affected him. "Him again," Steve said as he recognized the old man from Tony's party in the previous recording. "Who is this guy?" Tony wondered aloud. "I still think he was my neighbor," Peter said. "And I still don't remember him," Aunt May said. "So the Watcher drank my blood," Bruce said. "And got sick from it," Professor Hulk said. "So sick that he cut off my hair," Thor said, and everyone laughed. "And General Jackass is coming again," Logan said, and everyone tensed. At Port Johnson, Everglades, the soldiers got ready as Ross stood with General Sam Greller, who told him about a special ops commando known as Emil Blonsky. Said commando stepped out of a helicopter. "Blonsky?" Bruce growled. "He is an asshat," Professor Hulk said. "General Jackass and an asshat," Logan said, and everyone laughed again. The transport plane took off as Spar told the soldier about their mission, handing them photos of Banner. Blonsky asked if he was a fighter, to which Ross told him about everything Bruce had been charged with, telling Blonsky not to trank him as soon as possible. "You will find out soon enough," Bruce growled at Blonsky. Bruce was lying in his home when his laptop beeped and he quickly entered an encryption, with Mr. Blue telling him he had reduced the gamma concentration in his blood. Bruce asked if it would cure him, to which Mr. Blue replied in the positive but asked for more data. Bruce told him he had no data. When Mr. Blue asked where the data was, Bruce looked at Betty's picture again and typed, home. He then shut the laptop. You loved her a lot, didn't you? Natasha asked and Bruce nodded. At night, a military vehicle arrived at the favela as some soldiers took their position outside Bruce's house. As Bruce slept, his dog sensed the intruders and woke up, making Bruce wake up too. The soldiers snuck a snake camera through the door and started looking for him. The dog saw it and bit it, making them retract it. Good boy, Bruce said with a smile. A soldier put an explosive near the door and at Ross's order, Blonsky pressed the detonator, blowing the door open. They entered as the dog barked at them and shot tranks into the sleeping form of Bruce. They removed the covers, only to see pillows and a styrofoam head with a cap and wig on it. Smart, Natasha commented. I know you would say no, but you definitely are a potentially good S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, Clint told him. But he wouldn't want to be, Fury said. Too many headaches, Bruce said simply. Blonsky told Ross that Bruce was gone and annoyed by the dog's barking, shot him and a whimper was heard as the dog fell unconscious. No, Bruce cried in agony out as Thor put a hand on his shoulder in support. Oh no, Peter said sadly as he heard the dog's whimper while Aunt May put a hand on his head. Wanda had tears in her eyes as she remembered the death of her dog on hearing the whimper when she was a kid and Vision put a hand around her for support. Bastard. Thor cursed. Even I wouldn't hurt defenseless animals, Loki snarled. What did he get by shooting the dog? Steve said aloud. Nothing, Tony said. He was an asshat. He did bad shit. Logan said, he thought shooting the dog made him powerful. I wish I could have taken him with me, Professor Hulk said. I should have taken him with me, Bruce said as guilt flooded through him. Do not blame yourself, Dr. Banner. You were in a panicked state back then, T'Challa told him and he nodded. He's lucky I'm not getting my hands on him anytime soon, Sam said. Same here. Rhodes said. Trust me, you don't want that. Benjamin told them and they tensed. Hope he gets what's coming to him, Clint said. I am waiting to see that too, Natasha said. I have a feeling we will, Fury said. Same, Bucky said too. Can't wait, Hill said. You will see, Banner and Professor Hulk said at the same time. At least he didn't kill the dog, Pepper said and everyone relaxed at that. Blonsky looked out of the window to see a rope. Banner climbed out Ann's house, who was getting dressed. She screamed but he quickly shushed her. Blonsky and the other soldiers ran past the unconscious dog towards the streets as Bruce kissed Martina on the lips and thanked her. And that was the last time I saw her, Bruce said. She was a kind woman, T'Challa noted and everyone nodded. Bruce put his hood over his head and ran across the street, only to stop on seeing Blonsky and another soldier. He hid his face under a hood and tried to walk away but Blonsky had recognized him and the two started running after him, making him take off in the opposite direction. In his vehicle, Ross ordered all soldiers to pursue Banner. And it's on, Sam said. Bruce ran across Roshina as the Blonsky and the others ran after him. He ran through some children playing with a ball. Blonsky and the soldiers ran after him and the kids screamed in fear on seeing the military men. A normal day in all of their lives ruined by uninvited guests, Bruce sighed. I would love to meet this Ross, Thor growled darkly. Bruce continued to run across the confined space of the favela as Blonsky and the others ran after him. Blonsky aimed at him but Bruce ran into a corner and the soldiers ran after him as Blonsky took a shortcut. Bruce ran over at a rooftop, pushing the hanging clothes out of his way as his cap fell off. One of the soldiers ran after him but when the clothes were out of his way, he ended up falling off the edge to the ground. You had the entire place memorized, Natasha commented. For a time like this, Bruce said. And it paid off, Professor Hulk said, mostly. Bruce continued running and jumping around on rooftops as one soldier fired at him but missed. Bruce leapt down from that roof but realized his heart monitor was beeping wildly. He staggered near a box of Coca-Cola bottles and stopped there, breathing heavily. Blonsky saw him from the other side of the box and started aiming. Oh my god, Peter was saying repeatedly as everyone watched with held-back breaths. The heart rate managed to climb down as Bruce noticed Blonsky aiming at him and picked himself up. He saw Blonsky trying to aim at him and he ducked before running out of the way as people screamed in fear. Blonsky fired but Bruce avoided the dart. He continued running until the military vehicle stopped in front of him. And out stepped Thunderbolt Ross. The two made eye contact and the hatred for each other was visible in both of their eyes before Bruce took off again. General Jackass meets his quarry. Logan joked to lighten the mood and it worked as everyone chuckled lightly. He really is trying hard, Tony said. People try their best to save their asses, Fury said. And he managed to cover up his shady actions. T'Challa's side reminded a bit of his father. Ross ordered the soldiers to find him as he continued running while Blonsky and the other soldiers were on the lookout. Eventually, Bruce found himself in a crowded area. As he looked back to see if anyone was following or not, he accidentally bumped into a man. He turned to see the man and his friends glaring at him. It was his bald, xenophobic coworker and his friends. As if things weren't bad enough already, Bucky sighed, remembering the chase in Romania. He had to be there. Sam said too. I handled it, Bruce said, for a while. This guy was giving me bad vibes right from the start, Tony said. And Ross wasn't? Steve asked and Tony sighed. Bruce tried to defuse the situation but the bald man attacked. Bruce dodged and flipped him over his back, just like the instructor had taught him. He managed to crush the second one's foot and pushed the third one off before running away again. So that did help. Thor noted. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Natasha noted, recognizing the fighting style. The best I could get back then, Bruce said. If I still got into fights, I could combine that with Hulk strength. Professor Hulk said and everyone nodded. Bruce ran towards the bottling factory as the bald man and his friends chased him too. Bruce managed to sneak into the factory. Blonsky noticed the bald man and his friends sneaking in from his vantage point and informed Ross before moving in himself. And this is just getting worse and worse, Rhodes said. The universe hates everyone in this room, Hill sighed. Yup. Tony said in agreement. Bruce once again stopped and took deep breaths to lower his heart rate before noticing shadows, causing him to move away again. As Blonsky and the soldiers looked around for him, Bruce ran up and opened a door, only to reveal the bald coworker and two of his friends on the other side. He turned around, only to see the bald man's other friend. Shit, Sam said. And this is where it truly goes to shit, Bruce said. It's not gonna be pretty, Professor Hulk said too. One of them grabbed him and the other one snatched his backpack. Bruce elbowed the one grabbing him and tried to take it back but they threw it off. The two friends then grabbed him and pinned him to a wall as the bald one taunted him. Bruce tried to explain the situation as Blonsky and the soldiers arrived. Bruce's heart rate was climbing now as he told the man to not make him angry, to which the man mocked him. Blonsky fired a dart and it hit one of the man's friends, making him faint as the leader punched Bruce down. Bruce's heart rate was very high at this point. Now that was a bad idea, Fury said. More like bad coincidence, Pepper said. Bruce's eyes glowed green in the dark. Oh no, Peter said as everyone tensed. Here it comes, Professor Hulk said. You might not like it, Bruce said. The heart monitor fell on the floor as Bruce started spasming and the soldiers noticed it. The bald leader was annoyed by the noise and kicked Bruce, only to scream in pain as his foot broke. In spite of the situation, no one could help their laughter at that. He was pulled into the shadows by a huge figure as the two friends tensed. Blonsky noticed that too. As the two moved into the shadows, their leader was suddenly hurled away and he crashed through two windows before hitting a wall and falling down, dead. Bruce and Professor Hulk both winced. While the man was a jerk, he didn't deserve to die. It wasn't your fault, Bruce, Thor assured him, summing up everyone's thoughts. The two noticed a huge, green figure. It let out a terrifying and bone-chilling roar, making them run off. The sound was heard by Ross too via comms and the people there had to momentarily take off their earpieces for the sake of their ears. Uh-oh, Sam said, summing up everyone's thoughts. It appears they have unleashed the Hulk, Vision noted. Blonsky moved past the dead leader towards the source of the roar. The two friends of the leader were running off when the huge figure grabbed one of them. The other looked back but didn't break stride as the one who was grabbed was pulled into the shadows. A second later, his shoe fell on the ground. Is it just me or does anyone else think we're watching a horror movie? Peter asked. Almost feels like a Japanese horror movie, Sam said and everyone chuckled lightly in spite of the situation. The other friend ran past the soldiers as Ross told them to use everything they had got. Blonsky and the soldiers fired their darts at him, but they deflected off his impenetrable exterior as he turned around and charged, throwing machinery around. He grabbed two of the soldiers, startling Ross as Blonsky fired again, smashing some bottles. The huge figure hurled the two soldiers away and they hit a pillar and fell down, dead. The alarms of the factory started blaring at this point and the conveyor belt started. "And now this has gotten even worse," Aunt May said. The bottles smashed into each other at the belt and fell down as the soldiers fired at the fleeing figure. They ran after him, trying to fire at him but only hit giant clotheslines of steel. One of them threw a grenade and it fell at the feet of the green Goliath. It exploded, lighting up the place temporarily, revealing the huge figure's size to T. A visibly terrified Peter said. "These soldiers are in over their heads," Scott noted. "Prevents me from feeling bad for them," Hope said. As the smoke started clearing, the soldiers realized something was moving towards them. It was a giant clothesline, pushed by the figure at them. They ran or ducked to avoid as Blonsky fired at the floor under it to make it fall down, but to no avail. He sidestepped to avoid as it crashed into the wall and green soda showered Blonsky. "How do you like that, huh?" Tony said and everyone snickered. "A bath in the middle of a job," Peter said and everyone snickered again. "A green one," Bruce said and this time everyone laughed. "I bet he wasn't expecting that," Professor Hulk said. Blonsky was the only soldier not incapacitated now and followed the figure from above, firing at him to no avail. The figure stopped as Blonsky reloaded. The figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing its face, a huge green monster gritting its teeth angrily at Blonsky. The commando actually paled at the sight and lowered his gun. "Oh boy," Peter said in fear as everyone tensed. "Is it just me or did you look more scary back then?" Tony asked and everyone wondered about it. "I think I agree with you, bub," Logan said. The green Goliath lifted a pitchfork truck and threw it at Blonsky, who barely avoided it as the floor broke and he had to hold onto the tiles for dear life. He watched in horror as the monster roared and smashed through the factory wall. Ross screamed in terror as more soldiers ran up behind Blonsky. A terrifying roar was heard across the whole favela and in the nearby forests. "That was," Sam started. "Intense?" Steve asked and he nodded. "I can't imagine how bad it would have been for you," Bucky said as Bruce and Professor Hulk simply nodded. "Well, at least I got out of there," Bruce said. "Under those circumstances, it was the best that could be done," Professor Hulk said. "I concur," Tony said. "Yeah, I think you did your best, Bruce," Natasha said. "Well, I can't wait to meet Ross again," Clint said darkly. "All this," Wanda snarled, "and he had the audacity to put me in a collar." "I will enjoy meeting him," Clint said. The man had threatened his family and treated Wanda like she wasn't human. He considered her a part of his family too. She was like his daughter. "Take me with you," Thor said. "Well, Ross should start counting his days," Loki said. "I am with you lot on this," Tony said. "Me too," Steve agreed. "Let's continue watching," Peter said. "Yeah," Logan said, "you will get more reasons to hate General Jackass." "So what's going to happen now?" Peter asked. "I did turn back to normal," Bruce said. "But like always, trouble ran into me," Professor Hulk joked and everyone snickered. Blonsky put Bruce's bag on the table and noticing Betty's picture, asked Ross and Spar if it was his girlfriend, to which he replied she was a non-factor. Blonsky then told the two about the huge thing that had attacked him and his men and thrown a forklift truck like a softball. He said he was going to put his foot on Banner's throat and Ross told him the creature was Banner and asked him to pack up so they could go home. He then looked out of the place from where Banner had climbed out. "Ross doesn't treat him very respectfully either," Steve noted. "He doesn't treat anyone with respect," Tony said. "And Enhanced get even worse treatment from him," Wanda snarled. "Because he is General Jackass," Logan said. "I got a better name," Pepper said. All turned to her. "General Jackass." "What?" Thor asked. "Jackass and Ross combined make Jackass," Pepper said with a smirk, and after a few seconds of processing it, everyone laughed loudly at her wit. "You're the wittiest woman ever," Hope said as she struggled to control her laughter. "Wittiest person," Scott corrected. "Hey," Tony said in mock offense. "I think I'm with those two on this, Mr. Stark," Peter said and Tony sighed. "I won't forget this, kid," Tony joked and all laughed. The scene changed to a forest area where a naked Bruce woke up near a waterfall as the words, "Days Without Incident 1" appeared in white on the lower right corner of the screen. "And you're back to square one," Vision said. "I'd be more worried about finding clothes at this point," Wanda said, and everyone chuckled. "It is still a huge problem," Bruce said. "Not for me," Professor Hulk said. "Lucky you," Bruce said. Getting up, Bruce held the remains of his jeans tightly to cover his dignity and walked around until he spotted an oncoming car and, stopping the driver, asked if he could help him, to which the driver replied he didn't speak Portuguese. A shocked Bruce asked where he was, to which the driver replied Guatemala. "Okay, what?" Rhodes asked in shock. "Don't ask me," Bruce said, "I don't remember." "Well, at least you managed to get out of Brazil," Natasha noted. "And Ross is trying to gather more resources right now," Clint said. The driver said he was going to the next town and agreed to help Bruce, letting him inside and putting a blanket over him. He asked Bruce where he was going, to which he replied, "Home." At the army base, Ross and Blonsky walked together as the latter told the former that what they were dealing with was a new level of weird and he didn't feel inclined to step away from that, so if they took another crack at him, they needed to be prepared. Ross had an unreadable look on his face. He must really think of himself as a real-life Tom Cruise or something. Tony joked, "That man does his own risky stunts and this guy wants to fight the Hulk." "I think you have made a good observation, Mr. Stark," T'Challa said. "But Blonsky managed to screw himself over," Fury said. Bruce walked through the Chiapas, Mexico, half-naked and sat around near marketplaces, depressed, when a kid mistook him for a beggar and dropped alms into his hands. That gave Bruce an idea and soon, he had enough money to buy clothes. He got a huge pant and measured it behind a fat man near him and bought stretchy clothes. "That was smart of you," Hill noted. "The best I could do," Bruce sighed. Bruce then walked through a path in the middle of a forest, eager to return home. In the army base, Ross beckoned Blonsky into a laboratory and told him about the super soldier program, saying he had got people working on it again. Steve and Bucky exchanged shocked looks as almost everyone turned to them and Banner in shock. "What?" Bucky asked, exasperated. "The super soldier serum?" Tony asked. "What I was doing, it was an attempt to replicate the super soldier serum," Professor Hulk said. "Only I didn't know at the time," Bruce told them. "They wanted to make it again because the formula died with Dr. Erskine." Steve realized and everyone nodded. "What Ross didn't know was that he was playing with power he didn't understand," Fury said. "Typical of humans." Loki smirked, only to find everyone glaring at him. "You did the same," Thor said bluntly, and he sighed. "Well, Ross is giving me more and more reasons to expose his shady actions," Natasha said. "I will put a few more arrows in him now," Clint said. "Don't blame you, bub," Logan said simply. "He was an immoral man." Xavier sighed, "And now he is an immoral monster," he thought to himself. "Let's continue watching," Benjamin said. Ross said he had made Banner believe they were working on radiation resistance, which is why when he was sure what he was onto, he had tested it on himself. It had gone very wrong and very right at the same time. He then said Banner's whole body was property of the US Army. "What?" Rhodes exploded with rage. "How dare he?" Wanda shook with rage as Vision had to put an arm around her. "And that makes about 3 more arrows," Clint snarled. "He made me a fugitive and now he wants to use me," Bruce snarled. "Why am I not surprised?" "Because he is the worst," Professor Hulk said. "If anyone supported him after seeing this, then that person is as bad as him," Tony said, feeling guilty for working with him. "We can make this right, Tony," Steve said, and he nodded. "I will not let him near my boy," Aunt May said as she clutched Peter close. "I would love to light him up," Thor said. "Trust me, you're not the only one," Odinson told him. "General Jackass. Wish I could have put my claws in him back then," Logan said. Ross asked Blonsky his age, to which he replied 39. He asked Blonsky why he wasn't a colonel at this point, to which he replied he was a fighter and if he combined his current experience with his 29-year-old body, he would be invincible. Ross told him he could arrange something like that. "Oh no," Steve said, realizing what Ross intended to do. "Nothing good came of that," Hill remembered. "Yeah, made my week even worse," Fury sighed. "Your big week?" Natasha told Fury, I remember. This is going to get even worse, Benjamin said. I know, Bruce and Professor Hulk said simultaneously. At Culver University, Virginia, Bruce hid behind a newspaper, watching students go in and out as the words, "Days without incident." 17 inches appeared on the screen in white. He started walking towards the university but saw that the guard checked the IDs of the students, so he turned away, visibly deflated. That was when he saw Betty Ross walking at the campus, talking to some other teachers with a smile on her face. She sat on a bench as Bruce watched her from behind a tree, his face a mix of happiness and longing on seeing her again. Bruce had the same expression as his on-screen self. It had been years since he had seen her, and he still loved her even after all this time. What he had felt for Natasha was just infatuation. What he had felt for Betty was true love. 1. Thor put a hand on his shoulder for support. It's okay, Banner. Once I light up Ross, you can start something with her again. Bruce nodded at him with a smile. Thanks, Thor. She is still my friend and partner at times, Professor Hulk said as they turned to him, but because of my condition, it's impossible for us to be together. Bruce nodded at that. I will see if I can find a better solution. It'll be awesome if you do, Professor Hulk said. She looked in his direction and he started moving behind the tree when he saw another man walk up to her. She got up and with a smile, kissed him on the lips and the two went away hand in hand. Bruce understood though. He couldn't expect her to hold on to him after all these years. But that didn't prevent him from being deflated. Snap. Tony said. At a pizza parlor, the owner, whose name was Stanley Lieber, was about to close up when Bruce knocked at the door. He gestured him to look at Theed again and he looked up to see who it was. His eyes lit up and a few minutes later, the two were sitting across from each other. Bruce told Stanley that everything he had heard on the news about him was false and the man said that he never believed in that anyway as he knew Bruce and Betty well. Good to have your old friends believe in you even after so long, Wanda sighed. I know the feeling, Bucky said as he exchanged looks with Steve and Natasha. Bruce nodded in appreciation. Even I know that feeling, Loki said with a smirk. Bruce inquired about Betty and Stanley told her she was dating a shrink who was a really nice guy, which Bruce seemed to accept. Bruce asked for a bed and Stanley said he could use the spare room upstairs before Bruce asked for another favor. The next day, Banner rode into Culver University on a bicycle, dressed as a pizza delivery man with a box of pizza on the bicycle. Whoa, Tony said, surprised. Dr. Banner, the pizza delivery guy, Sam said with a smirk as everyone snickered. I even delivered some of it, Bruce said. Bruce attempted to sneak past a security guard, claiming someone upstairs had ordered a pizza. The guard refused to let him pass without clearance but Bruce said he risked being fired if he didn't collect payment and offered the guard a box of pizza he had not been able to collect on. The guard accepted it and the two shook hands with Bruce going inside. Nice, Natasha said. You're very convincing, Hill said. Sometimes. Bruce shrugged. Bruce walked upstairs and remembered the space in which he had worked 5 years ago just before everything had gone terribly wrong. He then walked into the computer class and started typing on a computer, exchanging a look with a student he had bribed with the pizza. Oh my God, Peter said as he recognized the student. What's the matter, kid? Tony asked. Yeah, what happened? Aunt May asked too. That's Roger Harrington, my science teacher, Peter said and everyone was a bit shocked, too. Yup. That's him. Benjamin said. He was the smartest student in computer class and worked on the computers. It's a small world, Professor Hulk said. Too small at times, Bruce sighed. Bruce logged onto the computer using Betty's password and searched for the data, only to find it was gone. He tried to search for his own name but there was no record of that either. Deflated again, Bruce entered his encryption into the computer and called Mr. Blue, telling him the data was gone. Mr. Blue said he couldn't help him without the data and asked what he was going to do now, to which Bruce replied he would keep moving. You found the data after that? Wanda asked. I did, Bruce said. And it wasn't pleasant. Professor Hulk told them to prepare for what was coming. General Jackass always has to stick his nose everywhere, Logan said and everyone snickered at the nickname Pepper had given Ross. You should demand a fee every time someone uses that name, Tony told Pepper with a smirk. Nah, I am not heartless, Pepper said and everyone chuckled. I remember how bad it was, Fury said, remembering his big week. At night, Bruce was preparing to move away as Betty and her boyfriend, Leonard Samson, arrived at the place. Stanley let them sit there and the two talked and laughed. Betty looked behind Samson for a moment and saw Bruce coming out of the door. He saw her and immediately shut the door, moving away. Betty, with a shocked expression on her face, got up and moved towards the door as Samson and Stanley looked at her in concern. And now it has become even more complicated, Sam sighed. Like always. Bucky said. Yup. Bruce agreed. Betty walked out of the place and looked around in the night for Bruce. Whispering his name. Bruce hid behind a trash can, his face a mix of emotions. He wanted to go up to her, touch her, hug her, kiss her, and never let go. But he couldn't put her in danger. Samson led Betty back inside and she asked Stanley to tell her the truth. With a sigh, he started telling her everything. And now it's out. Tony said. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Peter asked Bruce. A bit of both, he said. Sounds like something the Guardians would say, Professor Hulk said. The Guardians? Thor asked. Friends of ours, Odinson said with a smile, having fond memories of them. We'll tell you later about them, Benjamin said. Bruce was walking out in the rain, about to leave the city. That was when he heard a car pull up behind him. He turned around to see Betty walking out of the car, her face a mix of shock, happiness, and longing. The two ran up to each other and hugged tightly, not wanting to let go. Don't go. Don't go. She begged as the two hugged even tighter and she stroked his face and hair. I want you to come with me now. Please, come with me, please. No one said a word. The scene in front of them was too emotional to comment on. Peter, Wanda, Aunt May, and Pepper, the most sensitive people in the entire group, actually sniffed. Bruce lowered his head simply, remembering how happy he had felt in that moment. Professor Hulk had the same reaction. Once everyone had recovered themselves, Benjamin continued the recording. Betty drove Bruce to her home and shut all the blinds and doors before revealing to him that she had the data with her as she had taken it before they had covered up the mess. Yes. Thor said happily. Don't be happy yet, Bruce warned everyone. Bruce asked her if Ross knew about it, to which she replied she hadn't spoken to him in years. She asked him why they couldn't just go to him together and speak to him, to which Bruce replied that he wanted to dissect and replicate what he had inside him. She thought she could still reason with him. Steve sighed. He was an evil jackass but he was still her father, Logan said. A part of her thought he would do the right thing, Xavier said. That part was wrong unfortunately, Benjamin said. She found out soon afterwards what her father was, Bruce said. And she disowned him completely because of that, Professor Hulk said. In the army base, Ross entered an old storage area and found what he needed. He unlocked the device and collected the super soldier serum. The serum, Steve said as everyone watched in horror. Your strength in an animal abusing bully. Bucky sighed, this is not going to end well. You will see, Bruce and Professor Hulk again said simultaneously. At Betty's home, Betty helped Bruce set up his bed and gave him a shaver to shave his beard. He told her he needed to leave the next day, to her disappointment. He asked to borrow some cash for a bus and she agreed, saying she would walk him to the station, to which he agreed. The two later lay on their beds, thinking about each other and their predicament before finally falling asleep. At the army base, a shirtless Blonsky walked into a lab. Oh boy, Tony said, summing up everyone's thoughts. He is going to be injected with the serum, T'Challa said. Ross told him he had to stay disciplined though. The doctor told him they would inject him in the muscles and bone marrow. The latter one would hurt. Blonsky was then injected in the muscles via neck. He was injected into the bone marrow as well and winced in pain, trying not to scream, as Ross watched on. And now they have made an evil version of Cap, Tony said in horror. I wish you could teach him a lesson, Natasha said to Steve. I would if he ever crossed paths with me, Steve said. Just wait and watch. Benjamin said. The next day, Bruce and Betty stood in the Culver University, preparing to leave as lightning cracked in the sky. Betty stopped Bruce and untucked his shirt before taking off his cap and setting his hair lovingly. Ah! Sam and Rhodes said as Bruce and Professor Hulk shook their heads. That was when Bruce saw some soldiers running up and told Betty to run, in spite of her not wanting to leave him. He started running off too as military vehicles drove into the campus, with Ross giving orders in a tank. They had to ruin the moment, Tony said. Logan and Pepper said at the same time and everyone laughed. This is going to get serious now, Bruce said and everyone tensed. Bruce saw Blonsky and several soldiers running up to him and he took off in the other direction as Blonsky managed to outrun the other soldiers but stopped on Ross's order, stopping the others too. Bruce ran into a library as some soldiers followed him. Crouching between two shelves, Bruce took out the memory stick and to his own disgust, swallowed it. You, Peter said in disgust, summing up everyone's reaction. I did the only thing that came to my mind, Bruce said. Outside, Betty ran in front of the tank in which Ross was seated and begged him to stop. "Dad," she screamed and they all walked out, though Ross told her she couldn't see things clearly. Everyone's jaw dropped at Betty's bravery and love for Bruce. "She will see things clearly soon, General Jackass," Logan snarled. They noticed Bruce running up in the overpass and the soldiers locked him from both sides before 2 canisters were fired at Ross's order. As the gas came up, Bruce used his shirt to cover his nose. Betty ran up to him as 2 soldiers ran after her on Ross's order. She elbowed one hard, making him fall down as his nose broke. "She has one strong elbow," Hope complimented. "Maybe you can train her," Scott said. "Oh, even I would love to," Natasha said with a smirk. The other one grabbed her and threw her to the ground. Seeing that, Bruce's eyes widened and he fell down. A second later, a large hand smacked the glass, cracking it. The hand got greener and bigger as Bruce started transforming, painfully tearing through his clothes. Everyone saw a huge silhouette from outside before it punched the overpass, shattering the glass. The Hulk jumped out of the overpass on the ground as Ross said, "Now she'll see that you are a jackass," Tony snarled. "Oh boy," Peter said as everyone tensed, wondering what would happen now. "I think these guys are screwed," Thor said. Hulk roared loudly as Ross and Blonsky stared at him in anticipation while Betty stared at him in horror and shock, but not fear or disgust. The soldiers fired at him and he rushed them, unaffected. A Humvee came up to him, firing. Hulk changed course and rushed the tank, ramming into its side and sending it crashing. Another one arrived as Hulk stood between it and the soldiers before kicking it, smashing it. He picked it up and crashed it into a nearby statue, shattering the statue and sending the soldiers fleeing as Betty gasped at the scene. Hulk then threw the lump of metal at 2 other Humvees, shattering them into pieces and causing an explosion. "This is intense," Sam said. "Oh my god, Peter was saying again. "Did you do anything to Ross here?" Clint asked. "No," Bruce said and everyone deflated. "But I did do something to Blonsky," Professor Hulk said and everyone cheered up. Students arrived to take photos and videos of the scene as Ross ordered Blonsky to enter the fray. Blonsky fired tear gas grenades at Hulk which staggered him back before he ripped out 2 large pieces of the statue and brought them together to defend himself from another grenade before gritting his teeth in anger. Everyone was a bit unnerved by his expression except Bruce and Professor Hulk. Blonsky then ran up to Hulk and leapt over him to the other side before firing at him with his gun. Hulk charged furiously but he flipped to his other side and continued firing. "He's good," Natasha noted. "If only his heart had been as good as his fighting skills," Steve said sadly. The gun ran out as Blonsky ducked, rolled or flipped to avoid Hulk who attacked him with the pieces of the statue. Hulk brought a piece down on him but he barely avoided before kicking the piece to slide himself backwards. He then ran on Ross's order as Hulk chased him and 2 cannons arrived. They were activated. Blonsky tried to leap high but they hit him, sending him flying off as Hulk was hit with the full force of the cannons. He dropped the 2 pieces and covered his ears in pain. Everyone watched the scene with wide eyes as Peter almost bit his nails. "I'm so sorry, Bruce," Tony said as everyone turned to him. "Those cannon were made by Stark Industries." Bruce looked down and with a sigh, looked back up. "It's okay, Tony. Who would think the US Army themselves would use your weapons like this?" Tony nodded as everyone turned back to the screen. Hulk dropped to his knees as Betty begged Ross to stop but he refused. She screamed Bruce's name and Hulk heard. Her voice invigorated him and he picked the 2 pieces before getting back up. He defended himself with the pieces and threw one at the first cannon, destroying it. He then leapt and embedded the other piece into the other cannon, destroying it too as Ross watched in shock. "How do you like that, huh?" Peter asked with a chuckle. Not very much, Fury said. Even worse things will happen to him, Logan said. Not as bad as when I get my hands on him, Clint said darkly. A helicopter flew in on Ross's order as Blonsky fired at Hulk until he ran out. He then walked up to the Green Goliath and stood face to face with him. Ross ordered him to pull back, but Blonsky threw his earpiece off. Is that it? He asked Hulk. Is that all you got? With a snarl, Hulk kicked him hard as Betty gasped. Blonsky crashed into a tree, breaking most of his bones. Everyone clapped and cheered at the scene happily. Yes, Thor and Peter said at the same time. You got what you deserved, Wanda said too. Appears so. Vision agreed. I'm normally not happy to see others get hurt, but he deserved it, Aunt May said. He was pretty arrogant right from the start, Natasha said. And that arrogance was his downfall, T'Challa said. Dr. Erskine told me that on being injected with the serum, good becomes great, bad becomes worse, Steve said. So his arrogance increased. Bucky noted. And he became an even bigger asshat, Logan said. Ross coldly ordered the soldiers to fall back as Samson arrived at the scene and called out to Betty. Betty walked up to Hulk, unafraid of him. As he turned to her, she called him Bruce and attempted to calm him down. As his anger started fading, the helicopter arrived and Ross ordered it to fire, not noticing how close Betty was to Hulk. The gunship fired and Hulk quickly ran up to Betty to protect her. Ross noticed her proximity to Hulk and ordered the pilot to stop firing, but Hulk threw a huge shard of metal and it hit the helicopter, making it crash and explode. He covered Betty with his body as the explosion engulfed them. Ross screamed in horror. Oh, you actually care about your daughter? Wow, Tony snarled sarcastically. He is the most careless commander ever, Rhodes said. I wonder how he became Secretary of State, Steve wondered. Rainwater poured down as Hulk emerged from the flames, cradling the unconscious Betty in his arms. She had some minor burns. Glaring at Ross, he gritted his teeth and snarled. Ross shivered and backed off, knowing that he had to give up for now. Hulk then turned and leapt away with the unconscious Betty. So he does know when to give up. I'm surprised, Sam said. No, he doesn't, Clint snarled. He has a stick up his ass, Logan said. I know, Professor Hulk said. He is the worst person ever. Let's see what happens after this, Steve said, and everyone nodded. So who called the military? Tony asked. I don't know, Bruce said. It has to be Samson, Natasha said. Yeah, he is the only one who could have done that, Clint said. Stanley obviously wasn't going to do it, Steve said. Yes, it was Samson, Professor Hulk said. Jealous much? Scott asked him. No, concerned much, Professor Hulk corrected him. At Betty's house, Ross and the soldiers investigated the place, but finding nothing, came out. Ross told Samson he had done the right thing and that Betty was in incredible danger as long as she was with Bruce. Samson retorted that the only people from whom she was in danger were Ross and his soldiers because Hulk had protected her and they had almost killed her. Ross gave him his word that Betty's safety was his biggest priority. Your word means jack shit to everyone in this room, bub, Logan snarled. It doesn't mean much to Samson either, Benjamin said. Samson told him that he was a shrink, so he knew when someone was lying and said she would help him if she could. Ross said coldly that then she would be aiding a fugitive. As he walked off, Samson said, I used to wonder why she never talked about you. Now I know. Ross wondered how Betty met guys like Bruce and Samson as he walked into his vehicle. Respect, Sam said to Samson with a smirk. Yeah, he is great, Rhodes said too. I can see why Betty liked him, Bruce said. She can see which person is good and which person is not, Professor Hulk said. Hulk carried Betty to a nearby forest as it rained overhead. He gently put her in a cave. She woke up and screamed for a second on seeing his face. He backed off and hit his head on the cave. Ouch, Tony said. That doesn't look fun, Peter said. Because it's not fun, Aunt May told him. As Betty realized who was standing in front of her, lightning cracked in the sky and Hulk snarled angrily, thinking of it as a threat. He turned around and threw a rock before roaring at the sky as Betty watched. Looks like you're afraid of my brother, Loki said to Banner. Not all thunderstorms are caused by me, Thor shrugged. I'm guessing this is why Hulk loves to fight you, Bruce said. Yeah, I believe that too, Professor Hulk said. I can beat you pretty easily these days, Odinson said. Yeah, you can. Professor Hulk agreed. Didn't Hulk beat the hell out of you, Reindeer Games? Tony asked him. You really think my brother is anywhere close to me in power? Thor asked incredulously. As much as I hate to say it, my brother speaks the truth, Loki said. Real power hates embarrassing himself, so he is speaking the truth, Fury said. So Hulk isn't the strongest Avenger? Hill asked. You sure you won our second fight? Bruce asked Thor. Yes. Thor said. No you didn't, Loki said. I was until the Grand Master used his obedience disc, Thor retorted. I actually agree with him on this one. Thor would have beat me if not for the obedience disc, Professor Hulk said. Wait, second fight? Steve asked. We can tell you about it, Thor told him. We will see that too later, so no need, Xavier said, so everyone focused on the scene again. Betty calmed Hulk down and beckoned him into the cave, making him watch his head. The two just sat down quietly and looked at the rain as she assured him it was just rain. Pepper started. It almost looks romantic? Bruce asked and she nodded. Yeah, even I have to admit that, Professor Hulk said, Beauty and the Beast style romantic. Except no one has Stockholm Syndrome here, Steve said as everyone turned to him incredulously. What? I'm catching up. Steve shrugged. So proud of you, Cap, Sam said as he patted his shoulder. A Disney princess movie? Tony asked with a raised eyebrow. So our dear Cap is a little girl at heart. Natasha smirked as Steve blushed. So this was your plan, huh? Bucky said as everyone laughed. It's not like that's my favorite, Steve said and then realized he had made his situation even worse. What's your favorite, Cap? Peter asked. Let me guess, Sleeping Beauty, Aunt May asked, because you were frozen in ice. No, Steve said. Aladdin? Hope asked and he shrugged again. Oh I know, Scott said, it's The Little Mermaid. Steve didn't react this time. Gotcha, Cap. Clint smirked as everyone laughed at his expense again. What? I like its songs, Steve simply said as everyone stopped laughing and turned to the screen again. 1. At the army base, Ross and a doctor looked at Blonsky, lying on the bed, battered, with bandages all over him. The doctor said that most of the bones in his body were crushed but his heart was like a racehorse. Ross nodded and walked off as Blonsky's fingers twitched and he clutched his fist, his right eye snapping open. Oh, Sam and Rhodes said at the same time. Okay, that looked scary, Pepper said. Yeah, Bruce agreed. He's a fighter but a bully, Steve said sadly. Definitely an evil you, Bucky said. Betty woke up to see Hulk had transformed back into Bruce and was lying, half naked and prone. She quickly covered him with her jacket. Later, Betty supported Bruce into a motel in Ashwood, North Carolina, where he took a shower. He looked up at the shower and for a second, he saw the barrels of guns shooting at him instead and fell into the tub. Almost everyone jumped at that. So you have it too? Tony asked Bruce. Yeah, I'm just better at hiding it, Bruce said. Most of you are, Xavier told them and they nodded, knowing that all of them suffered from PTSD due to traumatic events, but not you, Mr. Stark. Stark simply shrugged. Betty returned to the motel to hear Bruce gagging on something. She put her bags down, called out to him and he walked out, saying he was fine. He showed her the memory stick which he had eaten. She was actually awed by that. You, Tony said this time, it was pretty disgusting. Good thing you didn't show me vomit it, Bruce told the people from the future. Yeah, I was almost tempted to add it, Benjamin joked as everyone snickered. But I convinced him not to, Professor Hulk said. Thanks, Bruce said. Betty then tossed Bruce a new heart monitor and stretchy purple pants, though he found them weird to Betty's amusement. Everyone laughed at the scene. Learn to appreciate her, Banner, Thor said. I have, Banner said simply. Good for you, Tony told him. In the news, the fight between the military and the creature was covered by all reporters, who all called him Hulk. So that's where the name came from, Hill noted. At the motel, Betty cut Bruce's hair expertly and asked how he had managed without her, to which he replied with clippers, making her chuckle. That actually looks pretty sweet, Sam said. Yeah, Natasha agreed, you two were made for each other. Thanks, Bruce simply shrugged. Betty then started kissing Bruce. He got up and the two looked into each other's eyes, the passion and longing clear. They then kissed each other passionately as Bruce pushed Betty onto the bed, his shirt out and her pants down. Aunt May started, "I have a kid. Don't worry," Logan said, "it doesn't go for long." "Nothing happens really," Bruce said, and everyone wondered what he was saying. Bruce's heart monitor suddenly started beeping and he forced himself to stop, telling her he couldn't get excited. Both of them were dejected as she comforted him again. "Oh boy," Tony shook his head, "I am sorry, Bruce." "It's okay," Bruce shrugged. "Really?" Thor asked. "No, it's not," Bruce admitted. "How do you do it?" Loki asked Professor Hulk. "I don't," Professor Hulk said, "there are no ladies of my size around. Except my cousin," he thought to himself. Everyone just nodded and looked back at the screen, not wanting to talk about this matter anymore. They all felt horrible for Bruce as he couldn't even procreate or have children. Ross was smoking when Spar told him something was up with Blonsky. The two walked to his hospital room to see that he was up again and looked perfectly healthy. "What?" Peter asked, shocked. "After tea tarted. The serum and willpower," Steve simply said. "I believe revenge is a powerful motivator here," Vision said. Ross asked him how he felt, to which he replied, "Pissed off and ready for round 3. "Oh boy," Peter said. "Well, round 3 was just the worst," Fury said. "Of course. It was part of your big week," Clint told him. "Your big was the worst, wasn't it?" Natasha asked him. "The worst of the worst, at the time," Fury said. At the motel, Bruce told Betty they couldn't use their credit cards, ID or phone, but she was allowed to take her lip gloss, which she used on her lips. She could also take her glasses and watch. "You're pretty street smart," Hill told Bruce. "I never thought you would be." "Yeah," Natasha agreed, "if you and Tony got stuck somewhere with no resources, I feel you will manage to survive." "I will try not to be offended by that," Tony said. "It's true," Pepper told him, and he had a look of mock offense on his face. "Thanks," Bruce and Professor Hulk said politely. They wondered how to get to the city with just $40 and no credit cards. Betty considered selling her mother's necklace. Bruce refused, saying it was all she had left of her, but Betty insisted. Everyone's jaw dropped again at Betty's love for Bruce. "You know what? You have to start it with her once we get back," Tony told Bruce. "If you don't, I will beat you up," Thor said as everyone chuckled. All right. All right," Bruce shrugged. Bruce and Betty later brought a truck with the money they got from selling the necklace as Bruce sent the data to Mr. Blue in an email. At the army base, Ross told everyone to look for them, saying he was looking for help so they had the chance to catch him. The email found its way to the base computers and Spar saw Mr. Blue was someone called Dr. Samuel Stearns. "Oh no," Steve said. "Busted." Tony realized. "Badly," Hope said. "Yup," Bruce said. "I wasn't expecting that." Bruce walked towards the truck as Betty stopped him and took a picture. Almost everyone went, "Ah," at that as Bruce blushed and Professor Hulk looked away. Later, Betty drove the truck and asked Bruce about the experience. He said they were like the induced hallucination experiment at Harvard, but 1,000 times amplified. She asked him if he remembered anything, to which he replied fragments. Betty reasoned that it was still him inside, but he rejected the idea, though she said it knew her in the cave. She said his mind was overcharged so he couldn't process it. "I don't want to control it. I want to get rid of it," Bruce said. "And look what happened now," Professor Hulk said. "Well, like I said, I will try to find a better solution," Bruce said. "Just don't send him away or anything like that," Professor Hulk said. "He is still part of us." Bruce nodded at that. At the army base, Blonsky took a larger dosage of the super soldier serum. "Oh no," Steve said. "He is going to become the next Red Skull at this rate," Bucky said. "Much worse," Bruce told them, and they paled. "Yeah, I remember," Fury said. Bruce dreamt of a Humvee blowing up on his face when he was awoken by Betty and the sounds of car honking. The two saw that all the cars entering New York had been stopped by the NYPD for checking because Ross would have alerted them about the fugitives. The two quickly got out of the truck and got off the bridge, using their remaining cash to hire a boat. They reached the mainland and stood in front of a map. "That was close," Natasha said. "A narrow escape," Clint agreed. Betty suggested to use the subway, but Bruce said him underground wasn't the best idea, so she decided to take a cab. The scene changed to the cab driver driving like a maniac, even bumping a person slightly. Cab would have been better, Tony said dryly as everyone else was just speechless. Yup. Bruce and Professor Hulk said simultaneously. Bruce's heart rate started going up as Betty made him stop, and as the two got out, she yelled at him, "Are you out of your mind? What is wrong with you?" The driver tried to flirt with her. "What's the matter, baby? You don't like a good ride?" He then made a kissing face, but her rage-filled face made him drive off in fear as she kicked the cab and roared, "Asshole!" She turned to a shocked Bruce who said, I know a few techniques that could help you manage that anger very effectively." She cut him off. "Zip it up. We're walking." The two then walked off as Bruce now realized who to not mess with. "Just when I thought your journey was a humorless drab," Tony said in amusement. "I think even Hulk would be afraid of Betty," Hope joked. "Of course. Hulk isn't completely senseless," Bruce told her. "Yeah. I wouldn't want to fight her," Professor Hulk said before turning to Thor. "Would you though?" "I don't have a death wish," Thor said as everyone laughed. "She is the goddess of wrath," Loki said. "Never mess with Elizabeth Ross," Steve joked and everyone laughed again. "I wouldn't," Wanda said. At Grayburn College in Harlem, Dr. Samuel Stearns was walking out when Betty approached him and introduced herself. He recognized her due to his work as Bruce arrived and asked, "It's Mr. Blue, isn't it?" A shocked Stearns asked, "Mr. Green?" "He seems pretty nice right now," Aunt May said. "Yeah, for now," Bruce warned her. "I know him," Natasha said as everyone turned to her. "How?" Bruce asked. "I sent her to clean up whatever Stearns had, but he had lost his mind by then, so she brought him in," Fury said. "So this really was your big week," Tony said, and he nodded. "I saw your fights at Culver and Harlem too," Natasha told Bruce to his shock, too. "And you still thought it was a good idea to recruit me?" Bruce asked incredulously, and she shrugged. Later, the three scientists sat together as Stearns said he was awed by how an unassuming man carried so much power and said that he had perfected an antidote, but even if everything went perfectly, they might just suppress one specific transformation instead of curing Bruce completely, so it was dangerous. "I'm guessing that's what happened," Sam said. "Yeah, that's what happened," Bruce said. At the army base, Blonsky looked at himself in the mirror and saw his spine was deformed now. "Okay. What is that?" Peter asked, unnerved. "His spine appears to have been deformed from the dosage," Vision said. "Just like Schmidt's face," Steve remembered, "and I doubt he can cover that up," Bucky said. "You don't want to know what that is," Bruce said. "Trust him." Professor Hulk agreed. "You will see soon though," Benjamin said. "And it won't be pretty," Logan told them. Blonsky then sat with other men. One of them asked how he felt, to which he replied, "Like a monster." "Because you are one," Fury said. Stearns uncovered the dialysis machine, and as Bruce was strapped to it, he kicked it to make it work. As Betty watched, Stearns gave Bruce an electric shock directly to the head, inducing the transformation. Everyone watched the scene intensed. Bruce's eyes glowed green as he started transforming. Stearns tried to use the machine, but Betty stopped him, saying there was more. Bruce then transformed fully, breaking his restraints and smacking Stearns on the face accidentally, sending him down. "Ouch," Pepper said. Betty climbed on top of Hulk to calm him down as Stearns kicked the machine and the antidote flowed into him as he slowly transformed back into Bruce, and she woke him up. "That is one brave woman," Hill said. "Very loving too," Steve noted. I know, Bruce sighed. "And it didn't work," Tony said. "Nope," Bruce said. "I'm glad it didn't," Professor Hulk said. As helicopters flew into the city, Stearns told Bruce and Betty how that was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen and said they could have permanently neutralized the cells or just suppressed one specific event, with him believing it was the latter, though there was no way to find out as the test subjects died. Bruce was shocked on hearing about the test subjects, and when he inquired about them, Stearns lead them away. "So he is anted, and he went crazy later," Fury said. "He is eccentric and ambitious," Bruce said. Ross and his people were in the city as one of the soldiers looked at Bruce, Betty and Stearns from outside the lab using his sniper rifle. "Oh," Sam said. "This is so not good," Rhodes said too. Stearns showed Bruce and Betty how he had synthesized the former's blood with intention of using its properties to cure mankind and even make them impervious to disease. "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," Pepper said as everyone nodded in agreement. Bruce refused, saying they needed to destroy it as the government intended to make it a weapon, not a cure. He called it the Promethean fire. Very good comparison. Thor agreed. Blonsky threw his earpiece off and ran upstairs in spite of Ross's orders. And that's what you get for trying to create another Red Skull, Fury said. The man is becoming crueler and more unstable every second, T'Challa noted. The sniper outside fired a dart at Bruce as Betty gasped and Stearns yelped. He fell down as Betty removed the dart but Blonsky arrived. She tried to stop him but he threw her across the room, knocking her out. Everyone clutched their fists angrily at Blonsky. Bastard. Thor sneered. Tony started, if I get my hands on him. First hurting defenseless animals, now hurting defenseless women. He has become even worse than before, Steve said. Blonsky then slapped Bruce repeatedly, demanding him to transform. Careful what you wish for. Wanda told him. Bruce didn't transform even though his heart monitor beeped, and as Ross and the others arrived, Blonsky knocked him out. Later Betty was given a shawl to wrap around herself by a soldier as Ross threatened a restrained Bruce and had him taken to the helicopter. Yeah. Threatening people who are restrained on beds or with collars. I bet you would piss your pants if they weren't. Tony snarled at him as Wanda realized he was defending her too, to her surprise. Well, Clint can hit him with arrows, I will light him up, and Wanda can throw him into the water to drown. Thor said as almost everyone laughed. I'm in. Clint said. Me too. Wanda smirked. Then I will take him out and throw him back in, Bruce said. Scott started, and I will go into his nostril and do nothing, because it's really disgusting. Hope said as she smacked his shoulder and everyone laughed. Just keep him away from my boy, Aunt May told them. Ross called out to Betty and she told him, I will never forgive what you've done to him. Ross said, he's a fugitive. She responded, you made him a fugitive to cover your failures and to protect your career. Don't ever speak to me as your daughter again. Ross discreetly threatened her, it's only because you're my daughter that you're not in handcuffs, too. The two then walked to the helicopter. Threatening his own daughter. Just when I thought he couldn't get any worse, Tony snarled. So he threatens not only others' families, but his own too. He is the worst, Clint said. Respect for Betty though. Sam said. Yeah. Rhodes said, take tips, Tony. This is how you stand up to Ross. Tony shrugged as Logan said, maybe you should call him the nickname Pepper gave him in front of him. Everyone laughed at imagining Ross's reaction as Xavier, that would be very amusing. Yes, it would be very entertaining, T'Challa agreed. Spar asked Stearns if he could make more like Bruce, to which he said he couldn't yet. Before she could speak more, Blonsky snapped her neck from behind, calling her an annoying bitch. Ross put this guy on his team? Steve said incredulously. Like I said, worst commander ever, Rhodes told everyone. And he somehow became Secretary of State, Tony said. He should be rotting in a cell. Xavier said. Stearns asked Blonsky why he hit everyone, to which he responded by pulling out a gun and asking to make him like Banner. Stearns said that Bruce's blood mixed with what he already had inside could create an abomination, to which Blonsky lifted him by the throat. A frightened Stearns said he wasn't unwilling, he just needed informed consent, and Blonsky had now given it. What? Steve said as everyone paled. The serum combined with your blood, Peter trailed off in horror. Is he out of his mind? Hope said. I think it's established that he is, Scott said. Yeah, he took it. Professor Hulk said, and it wasn't pretty, Bruce told everyone. I saw that too. Natasha said. But Ross covered up his involvement, Benjamin said, and everyone sighed. Which is why he isn't rotting in a prison, Fury said. Maybe we should leave him to rot in the raft, Sam suggested. Good idea. Rhodes agreed. He did become an abomination after this, Xavier said, and everyone paled. In the helicopter, Bruce smiled at Betty as she held his hands and he kissed hers. Ah, Natasha said. And you're doing it right next to him, Tony said. Respect. Rhodes agreed too. Bruce and Professor Hulk shook their heads. Stearns started the device and soon, Blonsky started growing huge too, and soon, he stepped down the table as he continued growing and his spine protruded from his back. A terrified Stearns tried to tell him to get back on the table but he smacked him away. Stearns fell down as Bruce's gamma blood fell on his forehead, mutating him. He smirked as whatever Blonsky had transformed into leapt away and the terrified screams of the soldiers could be heard. "Oh no," Steve said as everyone paled. "So Blonsky has now become something like Hulk," Bucky said. "And Dr. Stearns is also mutating," T'Challa noted. "I got him though," Natasha told everyone, "and he is locked up now." "Thankfully," Fury said. "And now this is going to get uglier," Bruce warned the others. "Yeah. Very ugly," Professor Hulk said. "If Luke was around back then, he would have joined in," Benjamin said. "Luke Cage?" Tony asked and Benjamin nodded. "Harlem's hero," Peter said excitedly. "Yeah. He is here too. He is an Avenger," Odinson said. "Well, let's get this over with." "It's very ugly," Logan said as everyone turned to the screen again.